Ever since the truth came out that he was a fake young master, his classmates had been buzzing with excitement, but not to mock him. Instead, they were simply thrilled to finally see what a poor person looked like, and that someone could finally claim the poverty subsidy. Our story's protagonist found that his adoptive parents weren't like those in novels. They weren't bitter or cruel, nor did they kick him out immediately. While the true heir, Mu Xian, lobbed insults and cold mockery, everyone ignored him to ask about our lead's future plans. He took a sip of hot tea and calmly noted that since their biological son was back, it was only natural for him to find his own parents. Mu Yaowei felt the boy had been raised well, always acting with such decisive grace, though it was a pity there was no blood relation. Decorum, after all, is no match for blood, so Yaowei didn't try to stop him, offering 3 million as a parting gift from the Mu family. The road ahead would be his own, and while the boy promised to remember their care, Yaowei merely gave a faint, detached response. He was told to pack so the driver, Lao Lu, could take him. He set down his teacup and headed upstairs toward the landing. Mu Xian's voice drifted up from behind, taunting him that his real father was poor and there would be no room for much luggage. He warned that luxury goods would be useless and to not make a bad first impression, while the boy simply glanced back at the waiting staff. He told them to throw away everything he wasn't taking, leaving Mu Xian standing there in a state of complete disbelief. To be honest, those were all limited edition brands worth a fortune. Throwing them away was practically the same as burning money. He found the whole situation rather amusing as he went upstairs and grabbed a small backpack, packing only his ID and phone. He took nothing else, leaving the Mu residence without a hint of regret, and soon the car dropped him off at an old, weathered apartment complex. He checked the house number and, once confirmed, knocked on the iron gate, looking into the weary eyes of the woman who answered. He knew instantly this was his biological mother, and with a gentle smile, he told her he was likely her biological son. Mother Yi stood there completely stunned as they stared at each other through the iron gate, until he politely broke the silence. He asked if they could talk inside, which finally snapped Mother Yi out of her daze as she hurried to open the gate and welcome him. She handed him a glass of warm water, her expression stiff with nervousness, and he took a quiet sip to put her at ease. He offered a simple explanation for the mix-up. Mu Xian was the biological heir of the Mu family, while he was their own son. Father Yi and Mother Yi had long suspected this might happen, but looking at their elegant, refined biological son, they couldn't help but feel a bit overwhelmed. At this moment, they became visibly uneasy, though he had already studied the Yi family records and had a general understanding of every member. He calmly asked if they had any questions for him, though to be honest, this reunion felt more like a formal business negotiation than a family meeting. Mother Yi nervously asked what he would like to eat, and with a gentle smile, he replied that he didn't have any particular cravings. Mother Yi glanced at Father Yi before deciding to head to the market, telling him to call Zishi and the others to come home immediately. Hearing the iron gate rattle outside a short while later, he stood up and walked out of the room to see who had arrived. And so, we see him meeting his biological siblings for the first time. With a warm, gentle expression, he introduced himself as Mu Chun. Hearing that deep, pleasant voice, Yi Shiwei felt a slight tremor in her heart as she met his gaze in complete disbelief. She asked if he minded how cramped and worn the house was, and seeing his calm demeanor, Shiwei felt her heart settle just a little. She seemed to be avoiding direct conversation with him, so he sat on the small sofa with Father Yi while the other three sat cross-legged on the floor. The space was undeniably crowded, and Father Yi let out a heavy sigh, noting that he could clearly see the family's difficult situation. Since the apartment was less than 60 square meters, Father Yi suggested renting a separate room nearby for him to stay in. He even offered to pay for his monthly living expenses, but Mu Chin simply looked at him with a calm gaze and asked if he wasn't welcome at home. Father Yi quickly explained that wasn't it at all. He was just afraid the boy wouldn't be used to this life. Once granted permission to stay, Mu Chin's mood brightened. He looked quite pleased as he told them that if they didn't mind, he would be living at home with them from now on. Yi Shiwei suggested getting him a larger bed, but he insisted the guest room sofa was fine, as he already planned to renovate the layout anyway. The younger siblings began jumping for joy at the mention of a new desk, just as Mother Yi emerged from the kitchen carrying the evening's dishes. Dinner was finally ready, featuring a delicious fish soup and several impressively large white prawns laid out on the table. The young girl's eyes lit up instantly, as this was her favorite meal, one they usually only enjoyed during the most special holidays. Having grown accustomed to luxury delicacies, Mu Chin didn't think much of the simple meal, yet he could clearly feel the Yi family's sincerity. The awkward atmosphere gradually dissipated. After all, he had arrived at his new home with nothing but money in his pockets. He planned to buy a few sets of clothes nearby, and when little Yi Jiai volunteered to show him the way, he took her hand and headed out. In the past, shopping always meant private VIP rooms, so picking out clothes himself was a novel experience as he selected a few casual outfits. After picking up some sneakers, we see them walking home when they happen to pass a small street stall selling candied fruit skewers. Noticing her staring at the glass case before quickly looking away like a well-behaved child, he decided to buy her a strawberry skewer. With the treat in hand, Yi Jiai's face lit up with pure joy as she giggled and held it up high toward him. She insisted her big brother take a bite, but he gently explained that he didn't particularly care for sweets. She happily calculated that there was exactly one piece for everyone: herself, her sisters, and their parents. As he led his sister back to the complex, he spotted Yi Zishi from a distance, rummaging through a tattered cardboard box for an old doll. Hearing footsteps, Zishi hurriedly hid the doll behind his back, watching nervously as Mu Chun approached him step by step. Mu Chun's expression remained perfectly calm, while Zishi lowered his gaze like a child who had been caught doing something wrong. He slowly brought the doll back out, mentioning that Mu Xian, the boy who had lived here before, used to love this toy. He used to sleep with it every single night, and Zishi hadn't expected him to simply abandon it like this. Mu Chun remarked dryly that the doll wasn't the only thing the other boy had abandoned, a comment that struck a chord deep within Zishi. Sometimes pain is the only way to wake someone up, he thought, before telling Zishi to just take the doll back if he wanted it. Zishi threw the doll back into the box with a bitter smile, while nearby, an old electric fan creaked rhythmically in the night air. Through the thin, poorly insulated windows, the noise of the neighbors drifted in. Later that night, he woke to the sound of hushed voices. It was Yi Shiwei whispering to their parents, worrying that Mu Chun likely wasn't used to sleeping on such a worn-out bed. She noted how he had been tossing and turning, suggesting they buy him a proper mattress once her scholarship money arrived the following week. They planned to pay the money back later. Their voices were hushed, but he could hear every single word with perfect clarity. By the time he had changed and walked out, Yi Shiwei and her father had already left, leaving him to wonder where they had gone. Mother Yi handed him a glass of warm water, explaining that Shiwei had returned to university early while his father went to drive for a rideshare service. He was also dropping the eldest sister off at the train station, as morning tickets were significantly cheaper. It was clear that Shiwei was doing everything possible to save money, yet this girl who practiced extreme frugality was worried about his comfort. She was ready to spend her savings on a soft mattress for him, a gesture that left him with a strange, unfamiliar feeling in his chest. With Zishi off to his part-time job, Jai playing with local children, and Mother Yi working at a handicraft workshop, he found himself alone. He eventually opened the door to find Su Manyu arriving in a whirlwind of energy, carrying her design tools with her. She complained that she hadn't even had breakfast yet, so he gave her a quick tour of the cramped rooms. As he explained his vision for the renovation, Manyu's face twisted into a look of pure distress, which, to be honest, was quite understandable. She pointed out that his old mattresses alone cost more than 20,000, yet now he wanted her to fix the whole house for that amount. He simply leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, noting that if it weren't a challenge, he wouldn't have needed her help. After measuring every inch of the house, she formed a layout in her mind, and the two of them sat down in the living room together. She asked if he was truly committed to staying here or if he was just bored of luxury. He responded only with a knowing, enigmatic smile. When he asked if she knew why the Yi family had gone bankrupt, she admitted she had heard a few rumors over the years. The story went that while Yi Shiwei was working, she had somehow offended the boyfriend of the Mu family's third young mistress. Supposedly, that mistress had crushed the Yi family in retaliation, but deep down, Mu Chun knew the truth was far more complex. He knew that Shiwei wasn't the real reason for the bankruptcy, but his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise at the door. We see Father Yi rushing in unexpectedly. Wasn't he supposed to be out on the road, picking up orders? He explained he had forgotten his charging cable, but his gaze quickly shifted to the young woman sitting next to Mu Chun, looking strangely familiar. Mu Chun took the opportunity to introduce her, explaining that his friend Su Manyu was here simply to look at the house layout. Father Yi stood there completely stunned, as he had certainly heard of Su Manyu, a world-renowned genius designer. Despite her youth, she had already won numerous awards, and many wealthy clients offered fortunes just for her touch. Su Manyu usually ignored such offers, and Father Yi, feeling out of place, insisted he wouldn't disturb their work any longer. Terrified of interrupting a genius at work, he grabbed his charging cable and hurriedly made his exit. The two didn't waste time on idle chatter after that, as Manyu needed to rush back and start drawing the blueprints. A little later, Mu Chun gathered his documents and stopped by the handicraft workshop where several women were busy working. They were labeling products while sharing local gossip, and he stood at the door to call out to Mother Yi. She gave him a gentle, kind smile before he headed out, navigating through the crowded intersections of the vegetable market. We see a black McLaren parked at the curb. Mu Chun pulled open the back door and sat beside a woman with soft, warm eyes. From the moment she had spotted him in the distance, her gaze hadn't left him for even a second. He felt a sense of ease wash over him and allowed a small, faint smile to play on his lips. Lu Ruyan let out a meaningful, knowing hum, the kind of sound that suggests she knew exactly what he was thinking. He found himself speechless and slightly amused by her reaction, which was quite typical for her. He reached out and gently poked her palm with his fingertip, a small gesture of familiarity between them. Leaning his head against Ruyan's shoulder, he listened to her soft, low voice and felt his entire body finally relax. His own voice grew fainter as he mentioned that Manyu had seen the layout and renovations would begin tomorrow. She noted that he was as fast as ever, suggesting that if he couldn't sleep well there, he should stay at her place tonight. When no answer came, she tilted her head to look at him, only to find that he had already fallen into a deep sleep. She smiled helplessly and told the driver to raise the temperature as the scent of citrus drifted through the quiet cabin. The scent always seemed to help him relax, and he ended up sleeping soundly on Lu Rian's shoulder for 2 full hours. The car had long since arrived at the administrative hall, where Rian gently held his hand, patiently waiting for him to wake up. Only then did she accompany him inside. The registration process was incredibly fast, with Rian handling every bit of the paperwork herself. Once everything was settled, Mu Chin's household registration was officially moved to the Yi family, firmly recorded in Father Ye's ledger. Later, while he was cutting into a steak at a high-end restaurant, his phone let out a sharp chime from a new message. The Mu family had deposited $3 million into his account, a sum meant to ensure his absolute silence regarding their affairs. Rian kept her head down as she sliced her steak, her voice carrying a cold, mocking edge that was hard to misinterpret. He hadn't been after their money anyway, but by accepting this hush money, the Mu family wouldn't have to worry about him talking. It also meant he wouldn't have to deal with them looking for trouble, a clean break for everyone, really, as Rian drove him home. The car stopped once again at the market entrance, where Rian ruffled his hair with a gaze so tender it was almost overwhelming. She waited until he had turned and disappeared into the market before finally signaling the driver to pull away. When he returned to the old apartment complex, Yi Zishi had just finished her part-time shift, and he quickly sat down for dinner. He had never tasted pickled fish like this before. The fillets were incredibly tender, and the greens were perfectly crisp and refreshing. The spicy and sour flavors were so appetizing that, for the first time in 17 years, he felt truly and completely full. He even finished 2 bowls of the fish soup, bringing a bright, joyful smile to Mother Ye's face as she promised new recipes. Zishi then mentioned that she had called the 11th middle school earlier that day to check on some details. She told him that if he was willing to transfer there and continue his studies, there was an opening available. It just so happened that he could take the spot vacated by Mu Xian, a detail Zishi shared with a bit of hesitation. She was being incredibly careful with her words, terrified that mentioning Mu Xian or the transfer might upset him or ruin the mood. Mother Yi looked down and bit her lip, admitting that their family's finances simply couldn't support his continued education at Shenghua. Mother Yi whispered that she and Father Yi had truly failed him, though we might find the family's logic a bit hard to follow. They felt guilty about their poor finances, their cramped apartment, and their inability to afford a prestigious private school for him. To be honest, Mu Chin saw no reason for such apologies. He believed that the things one wants should be earned by oneself. He knew that relying on others makes it impossible to truly rise, even if those people happen to be your own family. That was the harsh lesson he had learned during his years with the Mu family, though he thanked Zishi for worrying about his transfer. However, he intended to stay at Shenghua. Before Mother Yi could voice her concerns, he already knew exactly what she was thinking. He raised his hand slightly to stop her, explaining that as the top student at Shenghua High, his tuition would be completely waived. He told them they didn't need to feel sorry. He would fight for what he needed because it was his own future at stake. It wasn't a burden they were meant to carry, and hearing this, Mother Ye's eyes grew red as tears began to well up. She fought to keep the tears from falling, forcing a relieved smile, while Zishi quietly gathered her own emotions. Returning to her usual gentle expression, Zishi told him that if he had the means to stay at Shenghua, they would certainly support him. Since Shenghua wasn't far from the first middle school, she made a plan for their daily routine. She promised to pick him up after school every day. Then, after dinner, Zishi headed into the kitchen to wash the dishes. We see Mu Chan return to his room to study, and then we move to the following morning after the family finished breakfast. As they prepared to head out for work and school, it turned out he had called Lu Rian the night before to borrow a driver. The car was already waiting at the intersection. After waving goodbye to Mother Yi, the 3 siblings walked over to get in. Zishi froze when she saw the vehicle they were about to board, while Mu Chan took a quick glance at the Toyota logo. He had specifically asked Rian for her cheapest car, but apparently, her idea of cheap was the latest model Alfred. For someone like Rian, it was a budget option, but compared to the Yi family's battered second-hand car, it was a different world. The luxury of the van was almost absurd in this neighborhood, leaving Zishi to ask in complete disbelief if this really belonged to his friend. Zishi wondered aloud if he was still the young master of the Mu family, given he could call for such things even after leaving. Mu Chun remained perfectly calm, though he felt a quiet sense of helplessness regarding Lu Rian's extravagant arrangements. The Yi siblings settled into the back, and he asked his sister to send him the address of her part-time job. As Zishi snapped out of her daze, the driver pulled away smoothly while Mu Chun began texting Rian on his phone. He asked if she had just bought this car, noting that the trip to the city center would take over an hour. She replied that she worried he would be uncomfortable on a long ride, and besides, she could use it for errands herself. He stared at the screen and said no more, even though he knew perfectly well she had bought it specifically for him. After dropping Zishi off at the Western restaurant, the car returned to the road with a steady, quiet hum. They headed straight towards Shenghua High School, and we returned to the house that evening just as dinner was being served. The family gathered around the table to chat. To be honest, the last few days had felt somewhat magical for the Yi family. First, the internationally renowned designer Su Manhwa had actually agreed to handle their home renovations. Then, they were getting to know their son again, seeing how he remained unfazed despite returning to such a humble home. It was clear his confidence never relied on the Mu family name, but rather on his own formidable inner strength. After finishing dinner, Mu Chen showered and went to bed early, leaving the Yi couple alone in the living room. Mother Yi sat in deep thought for a long time, looking as though she had finally reached a difficult decision. She told her husband they shouldn't underestimate Mu Chen's connections and that they should try harder while they were still young. Father Yi nodded in agreement, admitting that in the 2 days since Mu Chen's return, he had been thinking the same. He had been reflecting on how to give the family a better life, and he realized they couldn't just stay as they were. Driving for a rideshare service was exhausting work for very little pay, and they both knew it wasn't a long-term solution. Ultimately, they needed to start their own business, though Mother Yi sighed, her face clouded with the worry of how to begin. However, business wasn't exactly booming these days, and Father Yi held his wife's shoulders tightly. His voice carried a newfound strength as he told her that since they succeeded once, they could certainly do it a second time, though they needed to study the market first. He knew a steady start required research. The next morning, Father Yi prepared to take Zishi to school. We see that Shenghua, the elite private school Mu Chen attended, was just across from Zishi's middle school. The siblings decided to take the bus together, as the station wasn't far from their neighborhood. There were plenty of empty seats when they boarded, and Zishi swiped her card twice for their fares. She shielded him as they moved to the back, while he found himself staring at the card on her bag. It was, quite literally, his first time on a bus, and he found the little card surprisingly convenient. He asked where he could get one for his own bag, which made Zishi fall silent for a moment. She unclipped it and handed it over, explaining that he should use hers while he waited to get his own. When he asked how she would travel, she simply noted that she could use her phone to scan in. Zishi smiled warmly. Seeing his genuine curiosity about the card, she was happy to let him have it. He hung it on his backpack as the bus began to fill up with the morning crowd. Aside from students and workers, there were many elderly commuters out early to hunt for grocery deals. The carriage soon became cramped, and the morning air grew heavy and stale in the crowded space. A faint, sour smell of sweat filled the air, a scent the old Mu Chen would have absolutely loathed. He used to refuse to rub shoulders with the public, but Zishi noticed her brother looked quite different now. He sat quietly by the window, letting the breeze ruffle his hair as the city blurred past. Watching his bright eyes take in the world, Zishi felt her overly mature brother finally looked his age. In truth, he had a rather endearing side to him. Now, bus drivers in this city are known for their aggressive driving style. To ensure the students weren't late, the driver reached the school stop in just 40 minutes, a record time, one might say. The stop was right at the entrance of the city middle school, but Zishi insisted on walking Mu Chen to his gate personally. With time to spare, the two strolled leisurely while luxury cars sped past them one after another. Occasionally, someone would roll down a window to shout a greeting, and Zishi felt a quiet sense of relief. It seemed her brother's social life was doing just fine. She had worried that once people knew the truth about his identity, they might team up to exclude him. Soon, they reached the grand, imposing entrance of Shenghua High School. Zishi felt a bit out of place and hesitated to go further, telling him she would come back to pick him up after school. Noticing her sudden bashfulness, Mu Chen gave a small smile and agreed. Just then, a tall figure came sprinting toward them. Mu Chen swayed slightly from the force of an enthusiastic hug as Lin Jejun threw an arm tightly around his shoulders. However, Jejun's eyes were fixed entirely on the older sister standing nearby, prompting Mu Chen to give a pointed cough. Jejun blinked, finally realizing this was the second daughter of the Yi family, and immediately stood tall to straighten his clothes. He introduced himself as Lin Jejun, Mu Chen's classmate and, as he claimed, his current personal bodyguard. Mu Chen tilted his head, wondering when exactly this bodyguard title had been granted, as Jejun leaned in to whisper. He explained that it was a special request from the young Miss Liu. She was apparently worried that the fake young master might get bullied. Having said his piece, he stood straight again. He hooked an arm around Mu Chen's shoulder and gave Zishi a playful, grinning guarantee. He told her not to worry at all, boasting that he was a Taekwondo black belt and quite capable of handling himself. He promised that as long as he was around, no one would dare touch a single hair on Mu Chen's head. Looking at the bright, cheerful young man before her, Zishi couldn't help but offer a warm and gentle smile. Zishi thanked him for looking after Mu Chen, her smile as warm as a spring day, which left Lin Jejun completely dazed. Mu Chen, his face flushing slightly, waved his hand and urged his sister to hurry back to her own school for classes. As they watched Zishi's figure disappear into the distance, Jejun remained lost in his own little world of admiration. He eagerly asked if his sister had a boyfriend or if she would mind him becoming Mu Chen's brother-in-law. Mu Chen let out a helpless sigh, asking if he had already forgotten that he actually had a fiancée. He asked if Jejun really wanted his sister to be a third wheel, which only made the boy burst into loud laughter. Mu Chen glanced at his watch, noting there were only 15 minutes until the bell, and he had no intention of being late. He quickened his pace toward the classroom, with Jejun scrambling to keep up right behind him. Jejun mentioned he'd heard the Yi family had gone bankrupt and was now burdened with quite a lot of debt. He had heard they moved into a run-down residential building, which clearly weighed on his mind. He wondered aloud if Mu-chun could ever get used to living in a place like that after his former life. In a grand gesture, he offered to simply give Mu-chun a small villa of his own to stay in. He even offered a full staff, but Mu-chun noted that if he were moving, others would have beaten Jejun to it. Jejun looked displeased at that, asking why he couldn't give a gift if the young Miss Liu was allowed to. He clung tightly to Mu-chun's arm, insisting that he was, after all, his most loyal and devoted brother. Mu-chun found it both exhausting and amusing, wondering when his friends had developed this sudden hobby for poverty relief. Between the luxury cars and villas, they acted as if leaving the Mu family had left him in utter ruin, which wasn't the case. And so, chatting as they went, the two reached the classroom door. But the moment they stepped inside, the once noisy room fell into a sudden, heavy silence, as every student froze and stared directly at Mu-chun. Mu-chun jokingly asked if he'd been disfigured, as they were all looking at him as if they'd seen a ghost. The tension broke as everyone let out a sigh of relief and laughed, joking that no plastic surgeon would dare touch a face like his, before asking if the rumors were actually true. It seemed the news had already traveled fast, so Mu-chun simply walked back to his seat with a calm, indifferent expression. Seeing him arrive, Shin Mingshi hurriedly scooted his chair over and leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He noted that in their social circle, news spreads like wildfire, and mentioned he happened to have an empty apartment under his name. He insisted it had to be better than Mu-chun's current situation and offered it as a temporary fix, but before Mu-chun could even refuse, Lin Jejun playfully slapped him away, pointing out that Mu-chun wouldn't even accept his villa. Mingshi could only pout in response. He knew better than to argue with a boy of such explosive energy, and so the group continued their noisy joking and banter. They were so preoccupied that they didn't even notice their homeroom teacher, Zhou Xiaomei, entering the room and asking what state secrets were so exciting. She remarked that their class was the loudest on the entire floor, and seeing her displeased expression, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Everyone scrambled back to their seats and sat up straight, not daring to make another sound. To be honest, the silence was quite impressive. We should remember that Manhwa is a top-tier elite private school, where the students are all children of the most powerful families. And yet, they aren't so different from ordinary students. They still fear strict teachers and dread getting a permanent mark on their records. The outside world often assumes these elite students just waste time flaunting wealth, but that is a bit of an exaggeration. In reality, their academic burden is far heavier, as they must master the standard curriculum alongside much more demanding subjects. They are expected to study economic management and equestrianism, as the founders of Manhwa were among the highest levels of the elite. The school enforces extremely strict rules regarding conduct, and any sign of disrespect toward a teacher is dealt with severely. The consequences aren't just for the student. Such a mistake could lead to a very harsh punishment that echoes far beyond the classroom. It could even impact their family's business interests. Teacher Zhou told them she'd let it slide since it was only the first day. She warned them to be smart during their final year and stay out of trouble, asking if they had all understood her clearly. The students shouted their understanding in unison, just as she announced that a new transfer student would be joining their class this semester. She invited a student named Mu Xian to join them, and we see the expressions of the students instantly turn quite strange. Every eye in the room shifted toward the podium. Lin Jejun shot a quick glance over, but Mu-chun only responded with a casual, indifferent smile. His relaxed posture made him hard to read. After several days of high-intensity etiquette training, it seemed Mu Xian had finally learned how to act like a young master. He wore what he clearly believed was a perfect, charming smile, trying his best to look the part of an elite heir. He introduced himself at a measured pace, explaining that he was Mu Xian and had been switched at birth by mistake. He claimed he had finally found his biological parents and hoped they could all get along during the coming year. Dressed in a high-end custom suit, Mu Xian maintained an air of gentle elegance, or at least, he certainly tried to. Perhaps in his old school, the mere halo of being a Mu family heir would have earned him instant popularity. Unfortunately for him, this is Manhwa, a place full of hidden power where his little schemes were far too transparent. As his voice trailed off, the room fell into a dead silence. Shin Mingshi, for one, was clearly annoyed by that pretentious display. He couldn't resist a bit of casual sarcasm, remarking that the real young master of the Mu family was truly something special. He noted how Mu Xian had barely returned to the family before managing to kick Mu-chun out of the house entirely. Mu Xian's eyes flickered with a momentary tremor before he habitually slipped into his role as the innocent, misunderstood victim. He lowered his gaze, looking as though he were struggling with deep internal conflict for a long, dramatic moment. Suddenly, a sharp shout echoed through the quiet classroom. Mu Xian turned his head in a panic to see where it came from. He found himself facing a furious Lin Jejun, while Mu-chun sat nearby, watching the drama unfold with an amused smile. Teacher Zhou Xuemei frowned in displeasure, staring at Lin Jiejun, who had slammed his desk and sternly told him to sit back down. Mu Xian suppressed a tiny, satisfied smirk, clutching the hem of his shirt as if he were the one suffering a great injustice. He softly mentioned his adoptive parents' financial struggles, suggesting it was only natural for his brother to feel such deep resentment. However, Zhou Xuemei didn't step in to defend him. She simply reminded them that this was a school of strict discipline. She reminded them that she was responsible for their conduct, as Shenghua students were destined to become leaders of their industries. We see that a teacher at this level is no ordinary person. Zhou Xuemei saw right through Mu Xian's clumsy little act. She simply didn't care to expose him publicly, merely warning him that Shenghua was not a place for his games. She added that he must wear his uniform tomorrow, which prompted a wave of mocking laughter from the rest of the class. Mu Xian nodded awkwardly and hurried off the podium to find a seat, while the classroom remained in a state of restless commotion. As the others gossiped, Mu Xian looked around, only to find his classmates discussing complex business investments and market trends. He understood none of it and felt completely out of place, eventually turning his gaze toward the center of the crowd. He noticed something hanging from a bag. It seemed the former young master had fallen, so far he now had to take the bus to school. Someone remarked that the school's tuition waivers were actually useful now, a detail most had forgotten until that very moment. The scholarships and poverty grants had all been arranged for Mu Chun, which he found both helpless and slightly amusing. Just as he was about to stand up, Mu Xian spoke up with a face full of self-righteousness, accusing the others of going too far. The group looked at Mu Xian with utter confusion. After all, Mu Chun was close with them and had always been quite easygoing. They were just joking as they always did, and Lin Jiejun honestly thought Mu Xian was acting like he had some sort of mental affliction. He had no desire to deal with this real young master, who was now busy telling Mu Chun how hard poverty must be for him. Mu Xian suggested that since Mu Chun couldn't handle the Yi family's lifestyle, he could go beg his own parents for mercy. He claimed that if Mu Chun just bowed his head and apologized, they would let him return, acting as if he were being incredibly thoughtful. In any other setting, people might have seen Mu Xian as kind, while viewing the fake young master as ungrateful and stubborn. However, the air in the room suddenly went still as everyone stared at Mu Xian in silence, as if watching a bizarre performance. It was as if they were looking at a strange new species. After a long pause, Lin Jiejun turned to Mu Chun with a puzzled expression. He asked quite bluntly if Mu Xian didn't feel embarrassed, because he was certainly feeling embarrassed on the boy's behalf. The crowd couldn't help but burst into laughter at that. To be honest, the words were incredibly awkward to hear. Mu Xian insisted he was only looking out for him, claiming the Yi family was bankrupt and couldn't provide a good life. He went on to say their parents were actually wonderful people who were simply acting out of temporary anger. He accused Mu Chun of being heartless for taking the money and leaving, urging him to apologize so he could return home. Mu Chun could only offer a speechless smile. Having lived with the Mu family for 17 years, he knew them far better than Mu Xian did. They hardly cared for their own flesh and blood, let alone an adopted son, and yet, Mu Xian claimed Su Manyu was designing a room for him. Mu Chun found this news quite surprising, while Mu Xian merely lowered his eyes with a sweet, satisfied smile. He claimed he had tried to decline the offer, but his parents insisted they had neglected him for far too long. They were determined to make it up to him, even demanding the best designers to renovate the space. They wanted everything exactly to his liking, he said, just as Mu Chun placed his phone on the table to reveal the truth. The secret was out. An irritable roar erupted from the phone, dismissing everything Mu Xian had said as pure nonsense. The voice on the other end demanded to know when they had ever agreed to a design, specifically calling out Mu Xian by name. The designer had told him to get lost the day before, wondering if the boy simply couldn't understand plain speech. Mu Xian had apparently been flaunting his status as the Mu heir, trying to bribe the designer into silence. He had even threatened that the Mu family was not to be trifled with, but the designer clearly didn't care for his money. He didn't care what family the boy came from. No one was going to bark orders at him and get away with it. The man was furious that Mu Xian was spreading rumors and damaging his professional reputation. As the voice on the phone grew even more heated, Lin Jiejun decisively ended the call and gave Mu Chen a knowing look. Mu Chen responded with a smile and a thumbs up, knowing that everyone in this room was far too sharp to be fooled. They all understood the game. At Shenghua, students weren't just there to study, but to build the connections that would define their futures. They knew that building relationships with valuable people now would be crucial for inheriting their family businesses later. To them, it didn't matter who was genuine or fake. What truly mattered was whether a person held any real value. Anyone at the top of their class was a future titan of industry, making this the perfect opportunity to network. While they might respect the Mu name, they realized that if Mu Xian were ever separated from his family, he would be nothing. No one initially held a grudge against Mu Xian, and they were happy to be friendly for the sake of the Mu family's power. However, he had been far too impatient. They had only remained silent because they didn't want to waste time on someone useless. But since Mu Xian insisted on pushing his luck, they couldn't be blamed for the cold, awkward atmosphere that followed. Mu Xian's face turned pale as his eyes reddened with a look of aggrieved self-pity, making him appear quite pathetic. Of course, where there is support, there is also resentment. Lin Zian suddenly stood up, feigning a sense of injustice. He demanded to know if they thought it was fun to make a fool out of someone in such a cruel way. He argued that Mu Xian was simply worried because the Yi family was bankrupt and only wanted to help Mu Chun. As he asked why they were excluding him, the others looked on, seeing right through Lin Zian's little performance. Lin Zian acted angry, but deep down he was thrilled. After all, he had always been overshadowed by Mu Chun. With the Yi family's sudden bankruptcy, he finally saw a chance to gain the upper hand and began putting on airs. It was a chance to finally best his rival, and befriending the Mu heir was a perfect bonus. Mu Xian looked up in surprise. He played his part well, masking his embarrassment with a look of gratitude toward Lin Zian, who returned a gentle smile. Lin Zian's eyes were filled with a staged tenderness, acting as if he truly considered Mu Xian a dear friend. And then, a sudden knock at the classroom door caused everyone to turn their heads in unison. A man walked in, ignoring the tension, and simply stated he was there to deliver something to the young master. Despite his earlier bravado, Lin Zian didn't dare utter a word of protest in front of the school's future elite. But the woman before them, Lu Ruyan, was already someone who could stand on equal footing with their fathers. Mu Xian quietly sized her up. The young woman wore simple, clean clothes. Her skin was pale, and her face was stunning, radiating an air of refined elegance. A deep red Bodhi bracelet adorned her wrist, and as she passed by, the faint scent of chamomile lingered in the air. Mu Xian was deeply shaken. While the Yi family daughter's beauty had always been the center of attention, seeing this girl changed everything. She felt Yi Zishi couldn't even compare, though since the girl was dressed so simply, she assumed she was just a delivery runner. Mu Xian had no idea, of course, that Lu Ruyan's simple outfit and those low-key accessories were worth a fortune. That Bodhi bracelet alone was worth a villa in Binhai, prompting Shin Mingxi to chime in with a playful joke. He asked what could possibly be important enough to make Lu Ruyan run an errand, as her gaze fell directly on Mu Chun. She made no effort to hide her favoritism, jokingly calling herself the young master's exclusive personal assistant. She claimed even a single leaf had to be delivered to his hand personally, causing the crowd to erupt in laughter and teasing. Neither Lu Ruyan nor Mu Chun felt awkward, remaining perfectly composed as the nature of their relationship became clear to everyone. They were childhood sweethearts, and since they both understood each other's hearts, there was really nothing to hide. They hadn't officially started dating, yet only because the time wasn't right, preferring to focus their energy on their careers for now. Lu Ruyan placed the documents on Mu Chen's desk, and we see the crowd immediately gather around in genuine amazement. As they crowded in to see the commotion, they noted how beautifully the project proposal was crafted, praising Mu Chen's extraordinary work. It seemed this year's spot was destined for him, as this plan scored far higher than the rest. Mu Chen simply smiled in silence. His relaxed posture suggested he already had the victory in hand, but Mu Xian glanced over and recognized the Yi family's style. She claimed it was just something the little Yi sister had thrown together, arguing that using a child's work for a major project was insulting. She suggested it showed a total lack of respect for the other competitors, but Shin Mingxi simply gave her a speechless, sideways glance. He told her that her comment was quite presumptuous, considering this was the top-rated proposal in the entire evaluation. "You call this something thrown together?" Mu Chun asked with a faint smirk, leaving Mu Xian completely speechless. He explained that his sister had put her heart into this project, preparing it specifically for him with great care. "How could your empty theories even compare?" he added, his voice carrying a clear note of protective pride. The crowd playfully accused him of favoritism, jokingly pleading for Lu Ruyan to step in and keep him in check. Lu Ruyan simply leaned over his desk, hands in her pockets, noting that it had always been the young master who managed her. "I hardly have the authority to control him," she teased, as Mu Chun reached out to playfully touch her bracelet. Mu Xian, refusing to back down, stepped forward and remarked that since she wasn't a student, her hustle for money was understandable. Lu Ruyan narrowed her eyes in confusion. She knew Mu Xian was difficult, but hadn't realized she lacked this much common sense. A heavy silence fell over the room as the realization hit. Someone had actually just called Lu Ruyan a delivery girl. It was, quite possibly, the most absurd joke of the year, leaving Ling Jiejun doubled over in fits of laughter. "You really think Sister Lu is just a runner?" he managed to gasp, wondering how Mu Xian could even compare herself to Mu Chun. Mu Chun could only manage a speechless smile, officially retracting any previous thought that Mu Xian might be clever. To be honest, she was simple, the kind of simple that borders on foolish. To think she could look down on such a person. How could someone everyone addressed with such reverence be ordinary? Lu Ruyan simply looked down at Mu Chen's hand. She mentioned that Su Manyu wanted her to deliver a message. The designs and furniture were ready, and work could begin tomorrow. Mu Chun lowered his voice, promising to reply later, his eyes meeting the girl's deep, cat-like gaze. Realizing the merger was finalized and she had a flight to catch this week, he quickly let go of her hand. He gently nudged her arm, telling her to hurry so she wouldn't miss her flight, while she promised him a souvenir. Lu Ruyan lightly flicked his chin, their voices dropping to a soft whisper that only they could hear. It was as if an invisible barrier had risen around them. The others instinctively stepped back, quietly enjoying the romantic atmosphere. Our scene shifts to the school gates during the busiest time of day, where snack vendors are just beginning their morning trade. Even though Shanghua is filled with wealthy heirs, teenagers can rarely resist the pull of street food as they bustle back and forth. Among them, Yi Zishi stands out with a gentle, refined elegance, looking very much like a noble lady from an ancient era. There is a hint of melancholy in her eyes, and one can't help but think that if Zishi ever starred in a period drama, she would undoubtedly capture the hearts of young men everywhere. Just look at Lin Jejun for proof. He can hardly bring himself to blink as two voices suddenly overlap, and we follow the sound to find the source of the commotion. We see Mu Xian wearing a brilliant smile as he jogs toward Yi Zishi, his face lighting up with genuine excitement. Seeing that smile causes Zishi's heart to ache. She is instantly reminded of the days she used to wait for him after school. Back then, he would run toward her with that same joy, and she truly adored her younger brother, even after the Yi family went bankrupt. They used to take the bus home together or walk when the mood struck them, though Mu Xian would always beg for a piggyback halfway. Zishi would happily carry her brother all the way home while he clung to her back, whispering sweet promises. He used to tell her she was the best sister in the world and that he was the luckiest child alive. But those beautiful memories shattered in an instant, and we see that Mu Xian's childhood smile eventually vanished. It was replaced by a twisted look of resentment as he complained about being fed up with crowded buses. He would demand she carry him, only to call her useless when she grew tired after just a few steps. He would snap at her to buy a bike or find a part-time job if she didn't have the money, quite a harsh demand for a sister doing her best. In the end, he abandoned the sister he once loved, discarding the person he had called the best in the world. Zishi swallows hard, unsure of how she should even treat Mu Xian now, though he seems completely oblivious to her inner turmoil. He maintains that sweet, innocent smile, telling her how much he misses the days they spent traveling to school together. He laments that since transferring to Shanghua, it seems his new classmates don't particularly like him. He claims they only want to play with Mukin, and as he speaks, Mu Xian's smile fades while his eyes begin to redden. He acts as though Mukin is leading the charge to exclude him, making himself look quite the victim, and Yi Zishi hears the subtext clearly. Recalling her time with Mukin over the last few days, a rebuttal almost escapes her lips. Mukin simply isn't that kind of person. She knows he wouldn't be so petty. Despite being raised in a wealthy family for 17 years, he is remarkably easygoing and generous. He never once complained that the Yi family home was too small or the bed too hard. In fact, he even praised Mother Ye's cooking. He would buy sweets for the younger sister and focus entirely on the family's needs. To be honest, he has behaved perfectly. He was so good, in fact, that Zishi felt guilty that she couldn't do more for him, as he was the one constantly looking after her. Mu Xian's face freezes instantly. He had assumed that once Mukin left the Mu family and saw that dilapidated house, his true colors would show. He expected all the spoiled tantrums of a young master to erupt, yet here was Yi Zishi, having a wonderful impression of him. It seemed that in just 2 or 3 days, she had forgotten the brother she lived with for 17 years to accept Mukin instead. Hearing Zishi's defense of the newcomer, Mu Xian stands stunned, while Mukin simply lets a small smile curl at the corners of his mouth. Mukin wonders aloud why young Master Mu is going around claiming sisters, his bright eyes narrowing with a hint of sharp danger. He suggests that perhaps Mu Xian just enjoys stealing other people's sisters, and with that, the gloom over Zishi finally clears away. A gentle smile returns to her lips as she stops giving Mu Xian even a second glance, while Mukin's eyes flicker with a hidden light. His lips curve into a soft, satisfied arc as we watch the two siblings walk away together, leaving the past behind. A thick fire of jealousy erupts in Mu Xian's eyes as he watches them talking and laughing. After all, that life was supposed to be his. Mu Xian grits his teeth and clenches his fists so tightly that his nails dig into his palms, though he is too angry to feel the pain. His breathing grows heavy and ragged, and it is only after their figures disappear from sight that he finally snaps back to reality. He tells himself he already has everything he ever wanted, currently enjoying all the luxury and prestige the Mu family provides. They are just a bunch of paupers to him now. He is the true young master of the Mu family, and he has a luxury villa to prove it. The resentment in Mu Xian's heart suddenly vanishes, replaced by a smug grin as he haughtily barks an order at Sun Shun. He demands to know why the man is just standing there instead of making tea, and Sun Shin bows slightly in response. We see that whenever the master and mistress are away, the servants must tread carefully, hardly daring to breathe around the young master. If the slightest thing displeases him, a scolding is inevitable. If the tea isn't perfect, he makes them replace it immediately. If the food isn't to his liking, the chef must start over, a sharp contrast to Mukin, who never once lost his temper. Mukin had at least respected them as human beings, whereas Mu Xian is prone to smashing cups and plates at a moment's notice. It is as if he views them not as staff, but as servants he can order around at will, and his malicious voice rings out again. Sun Shun pushes his thoughts aside and hurries over with the tea. Mu Xian takes a single sip before reacting. A second later, he violently hurls the cup at Sun Shun, who instinctively flinches back but isn't quite fast enough to escape. The scalding tea splashes across his foot, and Sun Shun lowers his head, quietly rubbing his reddened hand in pain. He quickly kneels to pick up the shards, promising to brew another cup, all while the butler watches the scene unfold. The butler adjusts his glasses and steps forward with an elegant, measured pace to speak in a calm tone. He informs the young master that it is time for his etiquette lesson, but Mu Xian glares back at him with pure resentment. The butler's expression remains unchanged as he notes the recognition banquet is this weekend, and the masters insist on punctuality. He emphasizes that no mistakes will be tolerated at the banquet, causing Mu Xian to stand up abruptly in a rage. Mu Xian demands to know who the butler thinks he is, reminding him that he is merely a servant paid by the Mu family. He finds it insulting that a subordinate would dare to command him, especially since Teacher Li is always so strict and cold. That teacher criticizes his every move without any regard for his status. To be honest, it's a wonder he hasn't snapped sooner. He knows they only act this way because they have the backing of Mu Yaowei and his wife, yet the butler simply bows. The butler calmly mentions that the two young ladies will also be returning for the banquet, leaving Mu Xian momentarily stunned. He has heard that the two Mu sisters have quite the temper, but regardless, this will be his first time meeting his biological siblings. Mu Xian knows he must make a good impression. Once he wins them over, he will truly be the young master of the Mu family. Then, no one would dare look down on him again, so he suppresses his rage and resigns himself to the etiquette lesson. In stark contrast to the cold atmosphere of the Mu residence, the small Yi family home is overflowing with warmth. We see the family huddled together in harmony, occasionally sharing food and playfully offering the 2 chicken drumsticks to one another. The children get the drumsticks, the adults take the wing tips, and those in the middle enjoy the mid-wings. Mother Yi smiles as she gives a wing to Zishi, while Mukin and Father Yi each receive one of the prized drumsticks. Zishi seems to be in a much better mood than usual, perhaps because seeing Mu Xian again allowed her to let go of the past. As Mukin looks at the drumstick in his bowl, he feels a rare sense of genuine warmth spreading through his heart. You see, the Mu family is obsessed with table etiquette, seats are far apart, and speaking during a meal is strictly forbidden. Not a single sound is allowed, and the simple act of sharing food from one plate to another is completely out of the question. Furthermore, with the parents often away and the 2 sisters studying abroad, the dining room was usually a very lonely place. The Yi family is entirely different. They share the best they have with one another, which is how a family should be, really. They chat and laugh together, and despite being squeezed into a tiny apartment, the atmosphere remains joyful and cozy. The home is full of the vibrant energy of life, and Mukin realizes that this is what a real family feels like. Mother Yi rubs her hands together nervously, looking a bit embarrassed as she addresses the table. She mentions that since the children are at school and Father Yi is out driving for a rideshare service, she wants to help. She plans to set up a small stall near the elementary school, though she worries her lack of experience might hold her back. Before she was married, she had been a sheltered young woman who only ever helped with the simplest of household chores. She never had to worry about a thing until she married Father Yi, and now she wishes to lighten the family's burden. Back when Father Yi's business was thriving, she had settled into the life of a full-time housewife, never having to worry about earning a living. After the Yi family went bankrupt, she had hoped to find a proper job, but Mu Xian complained that the household chores were being neglected. He insisted she stay home as a housewife, a role that, to be perfectly honest, is far from the easy life some imagine it to be. Her days were filled with endless, tedious physical labor that left her with no free time once the sun finally went down. Seeing her family struggle, she had agreed to handle the logistics at home, but now that Mukin has returned, things feel different. Everyone is filled with a new sense of determination, and she, too, feels the urge to contribute and do her part for the family. Zishi immediately offers her full support, noting that her mother has been cooped up doing chores for far too long. Without anyone to even talk to during the day, Zishi thinks starting a stall is a wonderful idea, a chance to do something truly meaningful. Whether it makes money or not, it would be a good excuse to get out of the house and clear her mind. Father Yi sets down his chopsticks and takes his wife's hand, acknowledging just how much she has sacrificed for them over the years. For the sake of the family, she had never really pursued the things she actually enjoyed doing. He tells her that everyone needs to feel a sense of self-worth, so if she wants to try the stall, she should go for it. Relieved by the family's support, Mother Yi turns her gaze toward Mukin, who has been quietly observing the conversation. After a moment of thought, Mukin suggests that selling stationery might be difficult, as it requires stocking a vast variety of items. The initial cost would be high, and to be fair, elementary school students don't exactly have the largest budgets. It would take a long time to see a profit, but since the school schedule is fixed, we see a better opportunity elsewhere. He points out that the snack stalls near the school are doing quite well, and suggests she consider selling food instead. With several schools in the area, business is almost guaranteed, though the early mornings would certainly be exhausting. She would have to wake up early to prepare fresh ingredients, but Myukin's approval makes Mother Yi beam with joy. She doesn't mind the hard work, but she worries that her simple home cooking might not be fancy enough for a snack stall. Myukin reassures her that her cooking is far better than any restaurant, and besides, they aren't aiming for a high-end gourmet experience. If she makes something delicious and filling for breakfast, there will certainly be a market for it, though the specifics remain a mystery. He admits he can't offer much advice on the menu, as he has never actually visited any of the snack stalls near the school gates. He hadn't even noticed what they were selling. As the young master of the Mu family, he had to constantly maintain his physique and appearance. He had to focus on a perfectly healthy diet while upholding a certain image, as the Mu family stubbornly believed that street food was beneath them. In their eyes, eating from a roadside stall would lower one's social standing, and being seen as a foodie would tarnish the family reputation. During those years living with the Muse, he had long since suppressed his own cravings and desires for food. Seeing how little he ate, the Mu family had replaced their chefs time and time again, searching for a solution that didn't exist. He eventually realized his lack of appetite wasn't the chef's fault, but rather the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the Mu household. Zishi thinks for a moment. She remembers a rice ball stall from her middle school days that was actually quite delicious. Since it seems no one is selling rice balls at the school gates now, she is certain they would have plenty of business. The couple shares a look, and we see that they both find this suggestion rather promising. Mother Yi decides to buy the ingredients tomorrow to practice, telling the children they will be her official taste testers. She has never felt quite this excited before. The mere thought of earning money and contributing to the family fills her with purpose. She feels energized, but Father Yi raises a crucial point. If they're going to sell rice balls, they might need a custom stall cart. He recalls seeing other street vendors, most of whom have specially designed carts for their business. These carts have a specific place for every ingredient, making the entire process clear and organized. Zishi suddenly remembers that the old stall used a steamer to keep the rice balls warm. However, she suggests they could use a wooden bucket instead, tightly covered with a layer of non-woven fabric. The heat retention should be excellent, and Father Yi, delighted, slaps his thigh and promises to ask his fellow drivers about it tomorrow. The conversation shifts to the most important detail, where to find the ingredients and what exactly should go inside their rice balls. They decide to buy materials tomorrow for a trial run, and Zishi immediately begins clearing the table with newfound energy. As they gather to discuss the plan, the air is light, occasionally punctuated by a few playful jokes and shared laughter. The family roars with laughter, and Myukin finds himself genuinely stunned by their sheer decisiveness. They are a family of action. They had only just mentioned the idea of a stall, yet here they are, already finalizing the menu and calculating operating costs. Perhaps when people have very little, they find the courage to take risks, and it is often this very boldness that leads to success. Myukin feels completely swept up in the joyful atmosphere. After all, he is now officially a part of this family too. Almost instinctively, he raises his hand and volunteers to take care of the stall cart problem himself. The room suddenly falls silent, and every eye in the house turns toward him, making him feel a bit self-conscious under their gaze. Father Yi frowns slightly, noting that while he knows Myukin might have some savings from his time with the Mu family, he is now a child of the Yi family, and while they can discuss things together, they won't let a child pay for their business. He explains that this includes the house design from Su Manyu. While they appreciate his connections, the rules remain the same. He acknowledges that Myukin's influence helped, but insists that if any expensive furniture is added to the home, he will eventually pay him back. It's a strange feeling for Myukin, one he isn't quite used to yet. To be honest, having never truly experienced the warmth of a real family before, he finds this level of care difficult to process. He quickly adds that he has a friend in the stainless steel business who might be able to get them a used cart at a low price. Only after hearing this does Father Yi nod in approval, satisfied that his son isn't simply throwing his own money away. Myukin then mentions that Su Manyu is bringing workers tomorrow, making sure Mother Yi isn't caught off guard by the sudden arrival. The family continues talking until well past 1 in the morning, eventually taking turns showering before the children have to head to school. After his shower, Myukin returns to his room and locks the door, finally checking the messages sent by Su Manyu. We can see that the great designer did her best, though the final material costs have spiked, even without including the labor fees. She likely used her own private construction crew, as Su Manyu has never quite trusted outside workers to meet her standards. Some crews rush the job and lack attention to detail, which simply won't do for high-end interior design. To solve this, she keeps her own team for the critical parts, though normally, these costs would be passed directly to the client. It's a way to break even, and between friends, a little money shouldn't matter. Myukin always knew Su Manyu had a bit of a temper, but she is loyal to a fault, and her outbursts usually have a reason, like a client having no taste or being utterly ungrateful. In his eyes, that could never be Su Manyu's fault. It was clearly the other person's problem. He transfers the amount on the bill, and just a second later, a message from her flashes across his screen. He pauses at the final sentence and sends a brief reply. Meanwhile, Shun Mingxi mentions the upcoming banquet invitation. His expression is one of pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. He is clearly enjoying the drama. Shin Mingxi understands Lin Jiejun's temperament perfectly well, after all. They can openly show their defiance now because they see the Mu family's position clearly. Offending them is no longer a risk. The Mu family has been in business for generations, and their power is not to be underestimated, yet someone dared to provoke them openly. By causing the Mu family to lose face, it's certain that no one involved will escape without consequences. The two Mu daughters are returning to the country, and Shin Mingxi looks at Mukin, instinctively seeking some kind of answer. Mukin simply notes that as a bankrupt high schooler, his information isn't as sharp as theirs. Shin Mingxi raises an eyebrow. With a teasing tone, he remarks that even bankrupt, Mukin is still a young master. Mukin stops in his tracks and turns around. As the three of them return to the classroom, they happen to overhear Mu Xuan's voice. He's announcing that his parents are hosting a banquet. He claims they want to introduce him as the Mu family's young master, adding that since he has no friends yet, he hopes everyone attends. Noticing Mukin entering the room, Mu Xuan offers a seemingly harmless smile, mentioning there will be plenty of good food at the party. Mu Xuan continues his performance, telling Mukin that since his parents bought him new clothes, Mukin is welcome to come over and pick what he likes. Lin Jiejun snaps back immediately, noting that those clothes only fit Mu Xuan and that our Mukin certainly doesn't wear secondhand goods. He adds that Mukin doesn't care for fancy food either. Honestly, every time they face Mu Xuan, Mukin can feel the fierce loyalty of his friends. Even though he is no longer the Mu family's young master, he has plenty of people backing him up, so he doesn't give Mu Xuan a second glance. As he walks back to his seat, we see that the Mu family's etiquette is lacking, as invitations should always be sent in advance. A last-minute verbal invite simply doesn't count. Meanwhile, Mu Xuan stands by the desk, her hands twisted together nervously. She puts on an air of being wronged and misunderstood, claiming she only worried that living in poverty would be too difficult for him. She suggests that Mukin must be suffering and that by inviting him to the recognition banquet, their parents might agree to take him back. Shin Mingxi cuts her off, asking why she's constantly apologizing and what exactly Mukin has done wrong to warrant such a display. Mu Xuan suddenly falls silent, tears welling up in her eyes, a classic performance of a fragile, pitiful white lotus if we ever saw one. She was the one who started the confrontation, yet here she is weeping as if she were the one being bullied by everyone else. Lin Zian, seeing an opening, steps forward to defend Mu Xuan, insisting that she is simply being too kind and thoughtful. He claims she's just worried about Mukin's well-being and asks why he's being so aggressive, prompting a cold sneer from Lin Jiejun. Lin Jiejun remarks that the guy must be losing his mind, especially since no one bothered to ask if Mukin even wants to return to the Mu family. He finds it absurd that Mu Xuan is making decisions with such fake sincerity, and for a moment, Lin Zian's expression falters. Being from the same social circles, Lin Zian surely sees through Mu Xuan's act, but he operates very differently from Lin Jiejun. Lin Jiejun is a rarity in class, a boy from a loving, harmonious home who is already set to inherit the family business one day. Lin Zian, however, has brothers to compete with, meaning the inheritance isn't guaranteed. He doesn't believe in leaving his fate to chance. Because of this, he is actively searching for a marriage alliance, thinking that connecting with the Mu daughters would secure his future. By linking his family to the Mus, he hopes to gain status at home, which is exactly why he chooses to take Mu Xuan's side. To Mukin, Mu Xuan seems quite simple for this circle, but her foolishness makes her easier to control, though he honestly can't be bothered to interfere. After all, other people's plans are none of his business as long as they don't cross him. He knows just how complex high society can be. In fact, he understands it better than anyone else present, and he feels it's better to avoid trouble than to make unnecessary enemies everywhere. One never knows if today's outcast might one day stand at the top of the pyramid. Yes, life has a funny way of turning out like that. We see Mukin finally speak up to break the deadlock, mostly to stop Lin Jiejun from offending everyone on his behalf as he looks at Mu Xuan. He makes it clear that everyone can live in peace, but if she dares to cross his bottom line, things will change quickly. He tells her to wait and see if the Mu family can even protect her. Hearing this, the sobbing Mu Xuan feels her heart tremble violently. She looks up at him in utter disbelief, meeting eyes filled with a calm confidence that she simply cannot understand. There isn't a trace of loneliness in him, and since the class continues to defend him, everyone still addresses him with the respect he once had. Now he even dares to speak so boldly, leaving her to wonder who gave him such confidence, especially if Lu Rian no longer belongs to him. As Mu Xuan stares at him with searching eyes, Shin Mingxi sits nearby in a relaxed, casual manner, watching the scene unfold. He remarks quite dryly that with a brain like hers, she probably wouldn't be able to figure it out anyway. Mukin can always get back what he needs. His personal connections might not match the Mu family's yet, but if all his resources were combined, even a family at the top of the pyramid might have a day where they slip and fall, a thought that makes Shin Mingxi smile coldly. In this circle, he notes with a hint of mockery, one must first learn how to use their eyes properly before acting. Lin Jiejun has no real desire to give Mu Xuan a lecture. He simply wants to prevent her from causing more trouble for them in the future. For once, he doesn't argue with Shin Mingxi's words, while Mu Xuan stands there, nearly grinding her back teeth to dust in frustration. She glares at Mukun until her eyes turn red with anger, before finally turning around and running out of the room in a fit of resentment. Lin Zian gives a hypocritical shout after her, but after being ignored, a faint, knowing smile plays on his lips as he speaks softly. He believes that to gain someone's trust, one must strike when their psychological defenses are at their weakest, all while watching Mukun warily. Lin Zian curls his lip, thinking to himself that he never does anything without a profit. To him, she simply has no value. After that, he strolls out of the classroom to chase after the fleeing Mushuan, finally leaving the room free of those two nuisances. They truly are products of the Mu family upbringing, focused entirely on business and profit, with no room for warmth or conscience. Mukun only got along with them because they were the same age and had known each other for years, building trust over time. To him, the Yi family members are merely strangers related by blood, no matter how long he might end up staying with them. Lin Jiejun is somewhat curious about this. Given Mukun's character and ability, he would likely start his own business after leaving the Muse. Now that he's joined the Yi family, he likely has other plans, but he certainly won't stay there forever. Being a minor makes things difficult, but at 18, he can open his own accounts. Until then, he expects no major changes. He isn't helping the Yi family for nothing, either. As for the renovations, he simply wants to live a bit more comfortably. A young master isn't used to suffering, and he doesn't want to sleep poorly all year. Plus, he hopes to owe the yes less when he leaves. Meanwhile, Lin Zian stands on the 5th floor corridor watching Mushuan cry behind the rockery, waiting patiently for about 20 minutes. Only then does he slowly walk down, deliberately messing up his hair just as he approaches the rockery to look disheveled. After a few quick exercises to get out of breath, he pretends to run up in a panic, exclaiming that he finally found her hiding there. He claims to have searched for ages. Mushuan looks at him in surprise, admitting she has no heart left for attending classes. Feeling Lin Zian's apparent concern, Mushuan is touched to find that someone is actually standing by her side after all. Suddenly, all the grievances in her heart explode, and her tears begin to fall like broken strings of pearls. She sobs that she only wanted to get along with her classmates, never expecting their prejudices against her to be so deep. Lin Zian gently pats her back, whispering that those people are always like that, blindly following Mukun's every lead. He claims he can't stand their behavior and has no friends in class either, so he offers to be her friend instead. Mushuan's eyes light up with genuine emotion as she nods heavily, letting out a muffled sob, the first kindness she's felt since returning home. Poor Mushuan truly has no one to talk to. The Mu parents are rarely home, and both of her sisters are still living abroad. Aside from a house full of oblivious servants, she has no friends at school, where everyone seems to blindly flatter Mukun. No one understands her pain, and one can hardly vent to a dog, so Lin Zian takes her hand and whispers that he understands. He tells her that moving from an ordinary family to a wealthy one requires a lot of adjustment, and the pressure must be immense. He offers to be her confidant, suggesting that while he might not be able to solve her problems, sharing the burden makes it lighter. Mushuan grips his hand back, asking if the reason everyone in class favors Mukun so much is because of Lu Ruyan. She notes that Ruyan isn't even in their class, yet everyone respects her, suggesting some kind of hidden deal is at play. She suspects Mukun doesn't rely on the Mu family name because his bond with Ruyan ensures he'd thrive even if he went bankrupt. While Ruyan is certainly part of the equation, Lin Zian doesn't actually know much, so he keeps his explanation rather vague. He explains that Mukun, Ruyan, and Shun Mingxi have known each other for years. Their bond isn't built on mere profit. Mukun and Ruyan are childhood friends, and though they aren't officially a couple yet, one only needs to look at them to see the connection. Then there is Lin Jiejun, the undisputed heir to the Lin family, who stands in perfect unity with Mukun. Their brotherhood is deeper than many blood relations, with those two backing him. Who would ever dare to offend him? Deep down, Lin Zian has to admit that Mukun is quite talented himself, though, naturally, he keeps that thought to himself. Mushuan now assumes Mukun's influence comes entirely from Ruyan and Jiejun, leading her to wonder just how powerful the Liu family is. Lin Zian clarifies that the Lius are among the top elite in the capital, with wealth and power rivaling that of the Mu family. The two families are close business partners, but the current heads of the Liu family, Ruyan's parents, are a different story. It is no secret in elite circles that they were in a car accident and remain unconscious, forcing Ruyan to take over prematurely. Ruyan proved herself to be quite formidable. Right after high school, she gave up studying abroad to manage the family's vast empire. In just 1 year, she has kept the business running smoothly without a single mishap, handling everything with remarkable order. Even the elders in the capital deeply admire Ruyan, often referring to her as a true pillar of the community as Zian continues his explanation. Mushuan listens thoughtfully while fiddling with the edge of her sleeve, noting that the Mu and Lu families are indeed very close. She tells herself that if Ruyan were to become her own fiancé, Mukun would no longer pose a threat to her status. Meanwhile, we return to the old apartment building. Mother Yi is busy making rice balls today, and since there are so many ingredients to buy, Father Yi decided not to take the car out. He stays home to help his wife, but when he sees Suman Yu at the door, he looks quite confused until she steps aside to let him through. He respectfully invites her inside, though Manhwa hesitates for a moment before greeting them with her usual polite, professional air. She glances at the busy figures in the kitchen and raises her voice slightly to ensure she is heard over the sound of cooking. Mother Yi quickly wipes her hands and comes out to greet her, while Manhwa simply waves a hand as if to say there is no need for formalities. The parents exchange a look, both feeling a bit dazed, until Father Yi finally asks what exactly all of this is supposed to mean. This question seems to catch Manhwa off guard, leaving her momentarily stunned by their lack of awareness. Father Ye's mind is practically racing. Replacing all the furniture with brand new pieces would cost a fortune, surely, so Mother Yi grabs his arm to steady him. She tells him not to overthink things since the purchase is already made, and not wanting to waste Manhwa's time, she quickly removes her apron. She places it on the tea table and looks at Manhwa with a kind, motherly smile, trying to make their guest feel welcome. Manhwa speaks very quickly, clearly a woman who doesn't like to repeat herself, which makes Mother Yi nervously rub her hands together. She decides to start by tidying the master bedroom first, as there are fewer items there and it will be easier to clear out. Soon, 3 people are moving furniture downstairs while 2 others begin tearing off the wallpaper as the couple packs away their personal belongings. Manhwa stands by as the supervisor, watching every detail with an eye that would make any contractor nervous. To be honest, any client hearing her instructions would feel their hair stand on end, and the workers naturally begin to move much faster. The reputation of the nitpicking designer Manhwa is certainly well-deserved, and soon the entire house is a whirlwind of renovation. Father Yi lends a hand where he can while Mother Yi returns to the kitchen to finish the rice balls, offering the designer a cup of tea. Mother Yi brings over a cup of tea just as Manhwa is scolding someone with her hands on her hips, though she instantly softens her tone upon hearing her approach. She turns around and takes the cup with both hands, thanking her and insisting that there is no need for such formalities. She explains that she has known Mukun for many years and suggests they just call her Xiao Su, a gesture that makes Mother Yi find her quite polite. She isn't nearly as difficult to get along with as Mother Yi imagined, who then mentions she plans to sell rice balls and is testing them out today. Since she didn't cook a proper lunch, she asks if Manhwa would like to try some, and Manhwa doesn't hesitate for a single second to accept. Admitting she is actually quite hungry, Manhwa watches as a smile spreads across Mother Ye's face while she glances at the busy workers. Mother Yi suggests letting them rest for a moment, asking if so many people would be a bother, but Manhwa quickly assures her it wouldn't be at all. In fact, she wants more people to give their opinions, so Manhwa tells everyone to stop working for a break since Mother Yi offered. She tells them to eat something before continuing, while Mother Yi heads to the kitchen to bring out several different flavors of rice balls. She cuts them all in half so everyone can have a taste and offer feedback, even though Manhwa hasn't even taken a bite yet. Just looking at the fillings is enough to make her start praising them, noting that most places outside only use frozen ingredients these days. It's rare to see someone use fresh ingredients like this, and after tasting one, she gives a big thumbs up and declares it truly delicious. She practically praises Mother Yi to the heavens, providing plenty of emotional validation while the workers also enjoy their meal. As the workers return to their tasks, Mother Yi asks Manhwa to sit for some tea, sensing that the young woman has something on her mind. Manhwa sits down and asks how she first met Mukun, noting that while Mukun is young, they have known each other for a long time. She mentions they have known each other for about 10 years now, which causes Mother Yi to give a thoughtful, quiet response. After a moment, Mother Yi admits sheepishly that since Mukun returned, she has felt a certain sense of distance between them. She asks if Manhwa can share more about Mukun's life and habits, and it's at this moment that Manhwa finally understands the situation. Mukun stayed with the Yi family for her own reasons, yet the family has truly come to care for her as one of their own. However, having never experienced family affection growing up, her personality remains cold despite her outward attempts to appear easygoing. There was a deep chasm between Mukun and her true family, leaving Mother Yi wanting to show care but having no idea where to even begin. Manhwa let out a soft sigh, sensing that the Yi parents were truly good people, despite her earlier fears that Mukun might suffer here. She began to share what she knew about Mukun's past, specifically back when she was still living with the Mu family. Her adoptive parents hadn't paid her much attention, and while Mother Yi heard she was raised alongside the Mu daughters, she certainly wasn't spoiled. Instead, her life was a constant battle of wits and survival, meaning she never truly experienced the warmth of a real home. Naturally, this left her lacking a certain human touch. She had plenty of friends, but they couldn't fill the void left by a missing family. Over time, she became unnaturally steady, possessing a poise and grace that far surpassed anyone her own age. Yet, she lacked the innocence of youth. As the Mu household wasn't a home at all, it was as cold and efficient as a machine. The 3 children raised their all-possessed world-class talents, but to be honest, not a single one of them had a normal way of thinking. They were brilliant, yes, but also deeply flawed, and hearing about the life her child led at the Mu house made Mother Ye's heart ache. She couldn't stop the pain, having assumed her son was happy and well provided for during his time with the Muse. She thought the distance between them came from returning to a poor family, but only now did she realize the truth of the matter. Her son had grown cold because he never knew warmth, leading her to ask what Myukin liked to eat, though Manhwa wasn't entirely sure herself. She had only heard that the Mu family changed chefs constantly, with no one lasting more than 6 months in that house. Later, as school let out, we see Zishi walking home with Myukin, passing neighbors who couldn't help but notice the changes at the Yi house. They asked if the family had struck it rich, wondering why all the furniture was being replaced, which left Zishi completely stunned. He instinctively looked at his younger brother, confused because he thought they were only adding a single desk and adjusting the layout. He wondered why every piece of furniture was being swapped, while Myukin simply blinked, deciding to let Manhwa take the blame for the expensive brands. He told himself it was fine since she knew the suppliers, and at that exact moment, Manhwa let out a sudden sneeze while scolding her workers. She shivered slightly, assuming the dust from the renovation was just too much and that she really ought to wear a mask next time. When the 3 siblings finally returned home, they found workers clearing debris from the guest bedroom, while others replaced the kitchen sink. Zishi and Jai stood there in complete shock, noticing a small shoe rack nearby that seemed far too narrow to hold even a single pair. However, once they pulled it open, they realized the shoes were stored at an angle, a clever design that maximized every inch of space. It was incredibly efficient. Despite its small footprint, it had more than enough room for the entire family's footwear. Finally, the shoes were no longer piled under the bed. The worn walls were covered in fresh wallpaper, and the old sofa had been replaced. A matching glass coffee table sat in the center, though the small corner table remained, still holding its familiar vase. Fresh carnations had been placed inside, and the single window in the living room, which once had heavy curtains, had been transformed. It now featured pure white blinds, making the room look much cleaner and brighter as the sunlight filtered through. The warm tones made the space feel incredibly cozy, and as Manhwa stepped out of the guest room, she looked genuinely thrilled to see Myukin. She practically pulled him toward the room, insisting that he come see the renovation, certain that he would be satisfied with the result. Zishi and Jai followed closely behind, eager to see how their own room had changed, but the finished product left them speechless. The two of them stared, eyes wide with disbelief, at the fresh sea blue color scheme and the elevated wooden platform. It had been converted into a tatami-style storage bed, and without the bulky wardrobe, the room felt much more spacious. The bunk bed remained, with the top bunk positioned horizontally and the bottom vertically, a mattress resting directly on the wooden frame. Beside it was a set of stairs leading to the top bunk, which was far safer than the vertical ladder they had used before. Each step doubled as a drawer for books or trinkets, while a small corner desk had been installed on the opposite side. The two siblings now had their own space to work without bothering each other, turning a cramped room into something beautiful. It managed to be fully functional without sacrificing style, a testament to Manhwa's skill as a renowned interior designer. Manhwa explained that the drawers could even be removed to serve as bookshelves, demonstrating by pulling one out from under the stairs. The space beneath allowed for books to be stored upright, and she gave the wooden platform a firm tap while looking toward Jai. Jai's small eyes sparkled like stars as she excitedly offered her thanks for the beautiful transformation. Seeing the child's radiant smile, Manhwa felt a surge of professional pride and gently ruffled Jai's hair. Feeling completely satisfied with her work, Manhwa leaned slightly toward Myukin with a knowing look. She whispered that she had talked her ears off to get this done, as 20,000 yuan normally wouldn't cover it. Myukin praised her, noting that only a designer of her caliber could achieve such perfection, which made Manhwa hold her head high. She joked that if his budget hadn't been so low, she would have torn up the floor tiles and replaced every wall. Myukin turned to her and promised to treat her to dinner soon, mentioning a new jewelry series he had recently released. Meeting her expectant gaze, he nodded and promised to send her a piece in a couple of days, much to her delight. Once the finishing touches were complete, Manhwa left with the workers, though the Yi parents insisted she stay for dinner. The family began discussing what to eat for the evening, as the renovation had kept everyone busy all day. The couple hadn't had time to shop or cook, so they decided to take the children out for a proper celebratory meal. Mother Yi took Myukin's hand in her palms and asked softly if he enjoyed eating hot pot. Though he wasn't used to such physical contact, he chose not to pull away and simply asked why she was curious. The only time he had eaten hot pot was years ago at a restaurant he owned himself, and the taste had been quite good. However, the prices weren't exactly friendly, and since wealthy people rarely went out for hot pot, it closed after 2 months. He hadn't touched the dish since then, so he agreed that hot pot would be a fine choice for the evening. Mother Yi mentioned a place at the intersection with fresh ingredients, noting that they really should reward Myukin for the renovation. The decision was made quickly, and we see the family begin their modest preparations to head out. As the family of 5 walked toward the restaurant, Mother Yi held Myukin's hand tightly, refusing to let go. He felt her attitude was warmer than usual. Perhaps that's just how biological mothers are, as they took their seats at a large table. Once they were seated, Father Yi handed Myukin the menu and told him to order whatever he liked, but he simply passed it along to Zishi. He joked that he was only there to eat, which made everyone laugh as Zishi began selecting the dishes for their celebratory meal. After dinner, the parents took their youngest daughter home to rest, leaving the others to walk through the brightly lit streets where shopkeepers called out their sales. Mukun decided to bring up a topic he had been curious about, asking Zishi why he was still in his third year of high school. According to the records from the Mu family, he should have started university this year, yet he hadn't submitted any applications and chose to repeat a grade instead. Given the Yi family's current financial struggles, it seemed more logical for Zishi to graduate as soon as possible and start a career. Instead, he had used connections to repeat a year, and when the question was raised, Zishi fell into a thoughtful silence, looking down at the pavement. Suddenly, he let out a self-deprecating laugh, realizing that since Mukun would find out eventually, there was no point in hiding the truth. He asked Mukun if he knew why the Yi family had gone bankrupt, and Mukun shook his head, sensing the two events were deeply connected. Zishi gently ruffled his younger brother's hair as he began to explain that it all started when their eldest sister, Shiwei, took a job at a Western restaurant. The family had been ruined by someone seeking revenge. Back then, the Yi family was considered wealthy, though their fortune was relatively new. Having only been successful for about a decade, they couldn't compare to the established dynasties, but Shiwei had watched the family rise and never took it for granted. She refused to be a pampered heiress who relied solely on her parents, choosing instead to focus on her own personal growth and education. Her dream was to be capable of supporting herself and finding her own value in life, even without the family's considerable wealth. She hoped to eventually help the family business reach new heights, so since high school, she had spent every vacation taking classes or working part-time. It was during one of those jobs that she unintentionally offended someone she really shouldn't have crossed, a mistake with devastating consequences. The original Muxuan had always blamed their sister for the bankruptcy, constantly criticizing her for her desire to work outside the home. The psychological pressure on Shiwei was immense, especially since Muxuan was always so verbally abusive toward her, as Zishi recalled with a heavy sigh. We see his expression darken as he explains that Muxuan's temper only grew more violent and unpredictable as time went on. On one occasion, Muxuan even tried to get physical with their sister, and while trying to protect her, Zishi had been shoved aside. Zishi's head slammed into a wardrobe, resulting in a concussion right as the college entrance exams were approaching. Although there were no major injuries, he suffered from frequent bouts of dizziness, which ultimately caused him to fail his exams. His parents and teachers suggested he repeat the year, and Mukun listened in silence before asking for more details. Zishi lowered his eyes, his gaze filled with a lingering sense of loss as he spoke. We see Mukun realize the weight of that self-deprecating smile. After 17 years of genuine care, the family had been utterly betrayed. To be honest, emotional betrayal hurts far more than financial loss, and Zishi suddenly turned to look at his brother. His eyes were filled with a surprising, gentle warmth in that moment. Zishi continued, explaining that they never expected anything in return simply because Mukun was part of the family. They only hoped that one day he would truly accept them. Meanwhile, Mukun chose the inner bed and tucked himself in. A new bed was certainly a luxury compared to the hard wooden boards he was used to, so he turned on a small fan. He sat up to call Lu Ruyan, and the moment the call connected, a low, playful laugh echoed from the other end. She teased him, asking if the young master had orders or if he simply missed her, though he claimed he was just bored. Perhaps because his childhood lacked much family warmth, he had always been quite reserved with his emotions. He had never actually heard someone say they missed him before. He told her that if it were business, he would say so directly. Calling because of boredom was his way of admitting he missed her. Rian's laughter grew vibrant, her eyes shimmering as she asked if the young master wanted a cheap chat or a premium one. He asked if she was really going to charge him, noting that her getting a call from him was already a win for her. He couldn't help but chuckle, suggesting that if that were the case, he should be the one charging her by the hour. He joked about a rate of 5 yuan an hour, but Ruyan checked the time and countered with a much steeper offer. She suggested 500 for 2 hours, making Mukun laugh heartily at her bold sense of business. Finally, she confirmed that all the documents were signed and would be notarized tomorrow, with approval expected in a few days. Ruyan stopped her work and leaned back in her office chair to chat, while Mukun responded with a distracted hum. As he told her about the evening's events, Ruyan couldn't help but find the whole situation rather amusing. She spoke with such certainty that it seemed she understood his emotions even better than he did himself. In the Mu family, he had the best of everything, yet all he truly wanted was their recognition and approval. He had pushed himself to be first in every exam and attended every training course just to hear his parents' praise. But that hope always fell short. At 8 years old, he finally understood why his sisters studied business while he studied etiquette. While they analyzed financial reports, he was relegated to foreign language speeches, forever barred from actual business knowledge. He was merely a pawn for a political marriage, someone meant to be obedient and eventually traded for corporate interests. He had stopped expecting affection, which is why the Yi family's genuine care felt so utterly irrational to him now. He racked his brain trying to find some trace of malice in them, but in truth, he was simply running away. He remained silent for a long time. Ruyan told him that he deserved all the love in the world and possessed the strength to face any change. There was nothing to worry about, and her words brought a rare sense of peace to his troubled mind. 2 years ago, when the Yi family went bankrupt and he learned he wasn't a Mu, he told Ruyan everything. She was the one who had truly encouraged him to leave the Mu family, her low voice now echoing through the phone. Perhaps his earlier warning had worked, as Mukin stayed quiet in class until the day of the recognition banquet finally arrived. At the banquet, Sun Yahan was quite surprised to see Lin Jejun standing among the prestigious guests. She asked if he was there to scout the opposition, but Jejun insisted he was merely passing through, for his brother's sake, of course. He then answered her question, noting that the two daughters of the Mu family had finally returned home. He pulled out his phone with a look of excitement, determined to livestream the entire event for Mukin. As Shin Mingxi entered the hall, his gaze swept the room, his expression darkening as he searched for a specific face. As he walked over carelessly, just about to speak, the speakers in the banquet hall suddenly crackled to life. The sound came from Mu Yaowei's microphone on stage. Looking over, we see Mukin dressed in a white suit. He looked every bit the pampered young master, smiling with a sweet, proud elegance while Jejun rushed to start a video call. Lowering his voice, Jejun whispered that the real show was about to begin as the banquet officially commenced. He panned the camera 360 degrees around the room, joking that with Mukin's temper, he wondered what his sisters would give him. Deep down, Mukin was certain it wouldn't be anything good as he sat alone at his desk back home. The lamp light reflected off his pale face and bright eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips as he told Jejun he had to go. He mentioned he was going to get something to eat and asked Jejun to record any interesting moments that might happen. Jejun gave a quick gesture to the camera, promising that the mission would be accomplished before hanging up the call. He switched immediately to the camera app and hit record, determined not to miss a single highlight of the evening. On stage, Mu Yaowei delivered a long-winded opening speech while Chun Jingyi stood beside him, putting on quite a performance. They acted as though there were deep bonds of fatherly love and motherly devotion. Finally, Yaowei handed the microphone to Mukin. He prompted the boy to greet the guests, and Mukin began by saying how surprised he was to learn the truth about his parents. It was a perfectly dignified speech, one that had likely been written by a professional for him to memorize, to be honest. Jejun curled his lip in disdain and rolled his eyes, while Shun Mingxi paid absolutely no attention to what Mukin was saying. In truth, few people in the room cared about how Mukin had lived for 17 years or how the Mu family had found him. The guests were only there because this was a Mu family event, regardless of whether they had business dealings with them or not. As the most powerful family in the capital circles, everyone had to show respect. Meanwhile, Mingxi noticed Jejun recording with his phone. Jejun kept switching hands as he got tired, so Mingxi leaned in close and whispered something directly into his ear. Jejun instinctively turned his head to look at him, only to realize they were far too close, causing him to quickly look away. As they handed over the phone, we should remember that while they are fiancés, both of them have only just reached adulthood. Their engagement was a business arrangement set since childhood, and they had always treated each other like brothers, with no romantic feelings involved. At least, that was what Jejun believed. Seeing him purse his lips and move aside, Mingxi let a faint smile play on his lips. It seems even the most straightforward people have moments of shyness, especially as Mukin struggled to remember the rest of his memorized speech on stage. Just as Mingxi took the phone, the sudden roar of a car engine echoed from outside, which was strange for a ground-floor banquet hall. Since the hall was tucked away in the most secluded part of the hotel, no car sound should have reached them, and Mukin's speech was abruptly cut short. Everyone watched the gate in total confusion until, with a deafening crash, a black Apollo smashed right through it. The guests screamed and scrambled for safety as the car plowed into the long tables, sending pastries, champagne, and glass shattering across the floor. The scene was absolute chaos, and Yaowei, who had been playing the part of the doting father, stared at the car with a darkening expression. The vehicle screeched to a halt in the very center of the venue, and a border collie suddenly leaped out from the passenger side. The dog charged straight toward the stage. Mukin, who was terrified of dogs, let out a scream and instinctively scrambled backward. He ended up tumbling over himself in a clumsy fall, flailing his arms and legs while shouting for the animal to stay away from him. However, the other guests could see clearly that the dog had stopped a full meter away, having no intention of actually biting Mukin. The driver's side door swung open, and a tall, slender girl stepped out, dressed casually in loose-fitting leisure wear. With long fingers, she slid her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose and leaned lazily against the car, radiating an air of pure, unbridled rebellion. Despite having turned the entire banquet into a disaster zone, she didn't look even remotely apologetic for the mess she had caused. A casual, mischievous smirk played on her lips as she remarked on how harsh her younger brother's words were. She claimed she was only being kind by bringing a dog as a meeting gift, suggesting that if he didn't like it, there was no need for such insults. To be honest, she didn't look kind at all. It looked much more like she was crashing the party on purpose as she whistled for the dog. The border collie obediently ran back to her and sat down, wagging its tail, while Yaowei's face turned a sickly shade of green from pure rage. Yaowei roared in fury, asking who gave her permission to drive in like that, and demanding to know where her sense of propriety had gone. He pointed toward the exit, ordering her to take her dog and her car and leave the premises immediately. Yulu calmly put the border collie back in the car, asking why her father was so angry and if he hadn't missed his daughter after 2 years abroad. She remarked dryly that perhaps having a new son meant he no longer cared for his daughter, but Yahweh simply warned her not to make him repeat himself. As Yahweh's tone grew even sharper, Yulu acted as though she were the one being patient, getting into the car and reversing out of the hall. We see the eldest daughter, Ningxue, step forward to soothe the guests, apologizing for her younger sister's lack of common sense. She expressed her regret for the fright they had all received and invited everyone to move to a secondary banquet hall she had prepared next door. With Ningxue stepping in to smooth things over, the guests were happy to save face, and no one dared to dwell on the chaos that had just unfolded. Seeing that the show was over, Jejun took back his phone, stopped the recording, and sent the video off, labeling the scene as absolutely brilliant. Meanwhile, Mukun was led to a private lounge by his parents, where the heavy atmosphere made it difficult for him to even breathe. In a weak, trembling voice, he tried to apologize, explaining that he had simply been terrified because of his lifelong fear of dogs. Yahweh only glared at him, disgusted that his son had used such foul language in front of a crowd of prestigious guests. He told the boy he had completely disgraced the family name, causing Mukun's eyes to well up with tears of pure disbelief. Having been pampered his entire life, he had never been scolded so harshly, and he looked up with a sense of burning resentment. He looked at his own flesh and blood, certain that this was all his sister's fault, but he couldn't even finish his sentence. Yahweh cut him off coldly, stating that if he had known the boy would be so useless, he never would have brought him back home. Mukun couldn't understand what he had done wrong. It was Yulu who caused the trouble, so why was he the one being punished? He turned a pleading gaze toward Jingy, hoping that a mother's heart would surely feel some sympathy for her son. But Jingy's face was like stone, her expression just as dark as her husband's, and her voice was devoid of any warmth whatsoever. She told him he had made them a laughingstock and warned him that if it happened again, she would send him away for good. Ordering him to go home immediately, Yahweh dismissed Mukun with a cold wave of his hand before taking his wife to handle the remaining mess. As if all his strength had been drained, Mukun collapsed onto the floor in a daze, letting out a hollow, self-mocking laugh. He finally understood why Mukun, the original son, had left so decisively back then, taking nothing but a backpack and his essential documents. He had left the Mu family in less than an hour, and to be honest, Mukun only returned because Jingy had practically forced him to. Taking a deep breath, Mukun forced himself to stand up with an expressionless face, walking out of the hall like a literal ghost. He told himself that family affection simply wasn't important. After all, he was now living a life of luxury and high status. This was exactly what he wanted, or so he claimed, but we see a sharp contrast as we move from the heavy Mu banquet to the warmth of the Yi family. Dinner consisted of his favorite pickled fish, and as the Yi family laughed together, Zishi mentioned that she had something to share. A classmate's sister worked at a film company, and apparently, short dramas adapted from popular novels were all the rage right now. She noted that his appearance was quite striking, suggesting that if he wanted a part-time job, she had an idea. She could recommend him as an actor for these short dramas, though the industry was admittedly a bit of a mixed bag these days. Many of these opportunities were just scams designed to trick people into paying upfront training fees. They would promise to arrange work later, only to disappear entirely, and Yefu, being a former businessman, knew these tricks well. He had heard of many such schemes, and to him, any easy job like modeling always felt like a potential trap. To be fair, Zishi wasn't entirely certain herself, as there was no shortage of predatory, pig-butchering scams in this day and age. She explained she was only asking for their opinion, and would only go for the interview if they all agreed it was safe. If they actually asked for a training fee, she promised to walk away immediately, a plan that he found himself supporting. He remarked that with a face like hers, she might just become an overnight sensation and get scouted by a major talent agent. And even if she didn't go viral on her own, he figured he could give her a little push behind the scenes to ensure the same result. He encouraged her to give it a try, noting that if she found acting fun, it would simply give her one more choice in life. Zishi let out a soft laugh and agreed, deciding she would take his advice and give the interview a try tomorrow. She then turned to Chun, asking if he wanted to accompany his sister since he was just idling at home anyway. He figured he might as well get some fresh air, suggesting they go after lunch so he could sleep in during the morning. Zishi affectionately ruffled his hair, and after dinner, he gathered the kitchen waste to take outside. Since it was getting late, Zishi decided to walk out with him, just to make sure everything was safe. The two siblings threw out the trash and were leisurely heading to buy some milk tea when they reached the intersection. Suddenly, a flashy sports car roared toward them and came to a steady halt right in front of our pair. Recognizing the Apollo hypercar, he stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing with a hint of danger as his smile vanished. Muyu stepped out of the car, resting her hands on the roof while staring at him with a mocking, unpleasant grin. She sneered, remarking that her silent little brother looked quite pathetic and shabby after only a few days away from the Mu family. He curled his lips into a cold smile, asking if the young master back home wasn't enough to keep her busy. Muyu claimed there was no need for such tension, pretending she actually cared about him, though her voice lacked any sincerity. She strolled around the front of the car toward him, her steps slow and casual after not seeing him for over a year. Claiming she had prepared a special gift, she pulled open the passenger door and a border collie jumped out. The dog sat obediently by her side, and though he hadn't watched the video Lin Jejun sent him yet, he understood the situation. He knew Muyu cherished her cars like life itself, yet this limited edition hypercar was covered in countless battle scars. The paint was badly scratched and stained with dried spills, and considering the timing, the scene was easy to reconstruct. One didn't need a genius to guess what she'd been up to, or that she had picked up this dog from Rinchingyan's place. Leaning against the door, Miyu noted that the proud young master hadn't changed. He still had a distaste for second-hand things. She added that the dog was a gift for him, even if she'd used it for a little show first, hoping he wouldn't be petty about it. He let out a cold laugh and walked toward Muyu step by step, stopping just inches away to stare directly into her eyes. His voice was calm, but heavy with meaning as he noted that she certainly knew how to be disgusting and that he truly hated dogs. It was unclear if he was referring to the border collie at his feet or the woman in front of him as they locked eyes in a tense standoff. Zishi stood nearby like a gentle breeze, unaffected by the hostile atmosphere, simply reminding him that the milk tea shop was about to close. Muyu finally seemed to notice Zishi, casting a contemptuous glance her way, as if she were beneath her notice. Zishi remained perfectly calm, her expression neutral and devoid of any outward hostility toward the aggressive woman. Muyu's laughter was filled with pure mockery, but he didn't hesitate to fire back at her without showing any mercy. He emphasized his final words heavily, yet Muyu didn't seem angry, simply leaning against her car with a lingering smirk. He rolled his eyes, unable to tell how much of her attitude was genuine and how much was just a calculated performance. Treating her words like a joke, he told her he lived right here and she should leave, but Muyu remained completely indifferent. She warned him that if he didn't leave with her tonight, the next person coming for him would be Muningsu, a fact he knew well. She reminded him that his eldest sister wasn't nearly as easy to talk to, though he quickly retorted that she wasn't his sister at all. He looked down at the dog's soft fur as the border collie wagged its tail at him, then leaned over to grab the animal's collar. He shoved Muyu aside from her car and decided to stop entertaining her attempts to stir up trouble. His expression softened as he looked at Zishi, and upon hearing that intimate address, Zishi draped an arm around his shoulder. She suggested they head back early, leaving the scene behind them. Later, we see Muyu complaining to another that their brother now had a different sister who didn't care about their family at all. The response was blunt. If she wanted him back so badly, she should go and take him back herself. Muyu wondered aloud if he was losing his mind, staying in such a small, broken house with nothing worth keeping. Muningsu remained perfectly composed, completely ignoring the anger radiating from her younger sister. If she returned to the Yi family, she would be treated like a young master, wearing designer clothes and being chauffeured everywhere. There was no reason to stay in a tiny, broken house. Muyu bit her lip, thinking of how she always fueled the fire when trouble brewed. When things went south, she was left to take the blame. Muningsu was becoming increasingly devious, and Muyu hoped she would keep that attitude. She warned her not to try and convinced Mukin to return later, only to be ignored. That would be quite the show to watch. With that, she hung up the phone. Muningsu set her device down, her fingertips tapping rhythmically against the desk. The sound was steady as she sat in deep thought, her expression cold and radiating the heavy pressure of someone in power. The manager standing before the desk kept his head low, terrified of provoking his unpredictable boss. Meanwhile, we see him and Zishi buying milk tea. They walked home in the evening breeze, refusing to let Muyu ruin their mood, though he noticed Zishi had been observing him all afternoon. After a moment of careful thought, she casually remarked that the second Miss Mu seemed quite concerned about him. He told her there was no need to test him. He had no intention of leaving with her. Having finally escaped that cage, he wasn't about to go back to the Mu family. He wasn't foolish enough to jump back into the fire. As for Muyu's concern, perhaps there was a tiny bit of it buried somewhere. But the concern of a madwoman was more than he could bear. At 5 years old, he hadn't understood the world and craved warmth and protection. When he was bullied by classmates in kindergarten, he went to tell Muyu. Normally, one would expect an older sister to stand up for her brother. One might imagine her going to the school to teach the bullies a lesson, but instead, Muyu dragged him to practice taekwondo. She told him that if his skills were good enough, no one would bully him, and then she proceeded to personally train him. She showed absolutely no mercy to a 5-year-old beginner, leaving him in the hospital for 3 months with broken ribs. During that time, only servants cared for him. Lu Rian would visit him after class, but the culprit herself never once showed her face. When he was finally discharged, Muyu felt no guilt at all. She simply claimed he was too weak and suggested he try learning Sanda kickboxing next time. Who would want a second sister like that? Meanwhile, the mother's plan to start a food stall was moving forward as the father scrubbed the cart clean. They prepared for their first day tomorrow, choosing a spot near the local neighbors to make it easier to gather feedback. After one final improvement, they planned to officially open the stall on Monday, specifically targeting the area near the medical school. The Yi family raised their milk tea for a group toast, wishing the mother a prosperous business as Father Yi sighed with deep emotion. He remarked that Mukin was the family's little lucky star, as every aspect of their lives seemed to be heading in a better direction. Back when Mukin lived here before, every day was filled with endless complaints, and the house was shrouded in a gloomy atmosphere. Life had felt like a machine running a cold program, but since his return, an ancient strength seemed to be pushing everyone forward. It allowed them to finally consider life's possibilities, and even the house renovation was thanks to him, hiding the traces of their past decay. Life had taken on a new look, and everyone was filled with a fresh sense of purpose, all working to make this home better and better. As they each strove in their own directions, they remained tightly knit together. Seeing this, Mukin lowered his eyes and smiled softly. He hadn't expected his efforts to yield such rewards. Perhaps his lack of connection with the Mu family was simply because they lacked any real bond. One only needs to look at Muningsu and Muyu to see that even having Mu blood in their veins didn't guarantee warmth. They shared no affection with the Mu couple, and Mukin realized that even as a biological son, he likely would never have been valued there. Bloodline was no excuse for the Mu family's coldness. The parents themselves were devoid of human touch, brought together by a loveless marriage. They had essentially created 3 cold machines. In a family where the parents are unhappy, the children are almost certainly destined for the same. This was a truth Lin Jejun had taught him. Zishi then suggested they video call their eldest sister, so Yeshui wouldn't feel forgotten by the 4 of them. Zishi realized that her sister still knew nothing of the recent troubles at home, and it was time to bring her into the loop. She jokingly said they should make her a little jealous through the screen and promptly dialed Yeshui's number. The call was answered quickly, revealing Yeshui applying foundation. She was just starting her makeup, preparing to head out. Zishi teased her, asking where she was going looking so beautiful, noting that her sister usually never wore makeup even on holidays. Since it was so late, she couldn't help but wonder if her sister was heading out on a secret date, which would be quite the development. Yeshui saw right through her little scheme and explained that the school's anniversary performance was tomorrow and she was rehearsing with classmates. She was simply trying out her makeup in advance. When Shui asked where they all were, Zishi couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. She flipped the camera to show the rest of the family, and as everyone took turns saying hello, Shui's voice rose in genuine surprise. Realizing she was looking at their home and that no one had mentioned the renovation, Father Yi excitedly explained it had all happened just 2 days ago. He told her he had some wonderful news to share, reminding her of how much she used to admire the designer Su Manyu. It turned out this house was her design. Shui was uncharacteristically thrilled, remembering how Manyu had become famous at only 16. Back when the Yi family had money, they still couldn't afford her, and after the bankruptcy, Shui had stopped hoping for such things entirely. She had even stopped reminiscing about it, never imagining it would actually happen. Meanwhile, Mukin took a thoughtful sip of his milk tea. Chewing on the pearls, he pondered the fact that Shui didn't just like Manyu. She practically viewed the designer as her idol. He wondered why his eldest sister hadn't studied interior design instead of Chinese medicine. Taking the phone, he stood up to give her a tour. He offered to show her the rooms, starting with the living area before moving toward the bedrooms to give her a better look. Exclamations of wonder kept coming through the phone as he introduced the new home, and Shui's face was practically frozen in a wide grin. She was absolutely in love with the design. Under Manyu's touch, the entire space felt significantly more spacious than before. The blue aesthetic was exactly to her taste, and in that moment, Shui had turned into a complete and total fangirl. Suddenly, Shui frowned slightly, calculating that a renovation like this must have cost at least 80 or 90,000. To be honest, she wasn't wrong. She assumed the design fee was waived since Manyu was a friend, but the materials weren't cheap. For Mukin, however, 20,000 was just the cost of a meal. He saw no reason to burden his sister with the cost. As Shui let out a sigh, he interrupted her, sensing exactly what she was about to say. He told her not to feel guilty, reminding her that once she finished her graduation requirements this month, her internship would begin next month. She promised to treat everyone to dinner when she returned. Mukin smiled, telling her to come back soon and experience the custom-made house. They hung up after a few more pleasantries, leaving Shui in a daze. She hadn't expected such a massive change in the week since she'd been at school. Deep down, she knew this luck was all thanks to Mukin, and as we see, even the simple act of changing a bed had started a new chapter. Mukin noticed his sleep quality had improved significantly, but his mood soured the moment he saw the caller ID and immediately hung up. The other party was relentless and called right back, so he waved a hand at Zishi to signal that everything was fine. He finally answered the phone with visible irritation, asking what she wanted, while a luxury car sat parked outside the Chitting complex. Mu Ningxua looked out the window at Mukin's mother and coldly informed him she was downstairs, demanding he come down to talk. She even threatened to invite the lady into her car, her voice so icy it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Realizing she had likely run into Mother Yi returning from her stall, he grabbed his keys and ran out, knowing Ningxua all too well. Her methods were ruthless, and he knew Mother Yi was no match for her. If his mother actually got into that car, things would get ugly. There was no telling what shocking things that madwoman might say to force him back to the Mu family, so he rushed downstairs. He caught up with Mother Yi just in time, catching his breath and slowing his pace to put on his usual easy smile. He asked if she had finished up early and how business had been that morning, and Mother Yi seemed quite happy with the results. He suggested she prepare more stock for tomorrow and urged her to go up and rest, while Ningxue watched their interaction from afar. Seeing him walking toward her with such determination, she slowly looked away and signaled the driver to start the car and pull out. He walked to the door and watched the Mercedes pull away, left with a massive, metaphorical question mark over his head. He pulled out his phone and called Ningxue back, his tone exceptionally harsh as he asked if she hadn't wanted to talk. He pointed out that he had come down only for her to leave, but Ningxue calmly replied that she simply didn't feel like talking anymore. She told him she would pick him up for dinner tomorrow night and hung up. Truly, none of the Mews were particularly stable people. After dinner, he changed his clothes and grabbed a small backpack to accompany Zishi to her acting audition, hopping onto a bus. He took a good look at the girl beside him, wondering how long it had been since she'd bought new clothes, as her white shirt was yellowing. The collar was losing its shape, and he realized she only had a few sets of casual clothes, all of them washed until they were faded. Zishi gave a slightly embarrassed smile, admitting that she didn't really care much about fashion or dressing up. At an age when she should have been dressing up, she spent most of her earnings on Muxuan, saving almost nothing for herself. She once thought working so hard to buy clothes and shoes for her brother was worth it, and now, she tells herself she doesn't regret it. Even though Muxuan had heartlessly cut her off, Zishi felt her conscience was clear. She had never mistreated him. The Yi family is truly the most selfless group we've encountered. One wonders if Muxuan saved their lives in a past incarnation. Mukin knew she needed to look decent for an audition at a big company, as dressing poorly would only make her feel inferior. They headed to a brand-name shop first, but the moment they stepped inside, a sharp, mocking voice cut through the air. Well, if it isn't the young master of the Mu family, the voice sneered, noting that his high-end suits had been replaced by rags. The speaker claimed he barely recognized him, and we see Zhou Si's face flush with a familiar, burning anger. The Zhou family owned a few factories and were wealthy, though not elite, and Zhou Si had always been jealous of Mukin's grades. Their relationship had always been strained. Zhou Si hated him but feared his status, though things were different now. Mukin was merely an adopted son who had been kicked out, no longer the prestigious young master he once was. Zhou Si wondered what right he had to be arrogant, but Mukin calmly reminded him that he no longer even used the Mu surname. He warned that the real Mu heir wouldn't let Mukin off easily, while Mukin simply offered a cold, thin-lipped smile. Ignoring Zhou Si's venomous glare, he pulled a modern Chinese-style outfit from the rack and handed it to Zishi. He told her it suited her perfectly. Zishi glanced warily at Zhou Si, but Mukin gave her a reassuring look. He signaled that she had nothing to worry about, prompting Zhou Si to let out a cold snort while staring Mukin down. He mocked Mukin's supposed poverty, pointing out that the clothes cost thousands and asking if he could even afford them. He accused them of trying things on without buying, asking how they would pay if they happened to get the clothes dirty. Mukin fired back, telling him that his finances were none of his business and asking him to stop being an eyesore. After dealing with the likes of Ningxue and Yulu, his wit had sharpened. He no longer had to protect the Mu family's reputation. Mukin made it clear that since he no longer carries the Mu surname, he'll face anyone head-on, leaving Zhou Si fuming with rage. "Just you wait," Zhou Si spat out, throwing one last threat over his shoulder before stomping away. Turning back to Zishi, Mukin smiled and told her that the outfit really did suit her perfectly, and he was right. A little later, as they arrived for the audition, Mukin looked around the office and realized the place seemed strangely familiar. And then, as if on cue, a voice rang out. "How is it that I'm seeing you again?" Zhou Si sat there, chin in hand, looking ready to enjoy a show as he advised Mukin that he'd be better off leaving. Mukin stood there thoughtfully, realizing this company belonged to Zhou Si's uncle, while Zhou Si let out a triumphant snort. Just then, a tall, middle-aged man named Chun Jiqiang stepped out, and Zhou Si rushed over to his doting uncle. Jiqiang treated his nephew like his own son, and the moment he heard someone was being bullied, his expression turned fierce. However, when his eyes met Mukin's smiling, almond-shaped gaze, he suddenly offered a greeting so respectful it was jarring. Zhou Si's eyes nearly popped out of his head as Jiqiang pushed him aside and hurried toward Mukin with a bow. Mukin calmly took a sip of water, explaining that he was simply there to accompany his sister for her screen test. He then cast a long, meaningful look toward Zhou Si, which, to be honest, made the atmosphere quite heavy. We learned that Mukin had been studying investment under Lu Rian for years, and he'd honestly lost track of all his holdings. As it turns out, the owners of the companies where he holds shares all respectfully refer to him as Brother Chun. Mukin glanced at Zhou Si, noting that true power comes from within, not from relying on the influence of others. Jiqiang panicked, asking his nephew if there was a misunderstanding and demanding he apologize to Brother Chun immediately. Mukin waved it off, saying there was no misunderstanding. Zhou Si simply disliked him, and personal matters shouldn't be mixed with business. Jiqiang praised Mukin for his magnanimity, relieved that he wasn't the type to use his position for a personal vendetta. He admitted his nephew had been spoiled and promised that, from now on, he would certainly keep the boy's temper in check. Zhou Si gritted his teeth as a dozen actors filed out of the room, and among them was Zishi. Mukin immediately dropped his intimidating aura, and Zishi smiled, explaining she'd landed a role with fewer scenes. After a quick goodbye to Chen Jiqiang, the siblings left, and Mukin decided to buy 2 outfits for everyone at home. He intended them as mid-autumn gifts, but seeing him spend nearly 10,000 all at once made Zishi feel quite uneasy. She worried their parents would be too embarrassed to accept clothes that cost over 1,000 each, which is understandable, really. Mukin argued that buying a few quality pieces was better than cheap, flimsy ones. He wanted them to have a proper wardrobe. He wanted them to look presentable, though spending thousands on clothes was also a way to spite Mu Yulu. When Yulu received the news, she was absolutely livid that Mukin was buying new clothes for the entire Yi family. She fumed that in 17 years of being siblings, he had never once bought a single piece of clothing for her. And yet, here he was, running off to the Yi family to take care of that so-called sister of his. Determined to have it out with him, Yulu grabbed her phone and keys, intent on dragging him back home today. However, her manager quickly stepped in her path, nervously asking what she actually hoped to achieve by going there. He reminded her that she was the one who ordered the Yi family's bankruptcy, so Mukin was likely still furious. She hadn't caused the bankruptcy out of malice, but to keep him from leaving the Mu family, a plan that clearly backfired. She never imagined he would leave so decisively, showing that she didn't trust his character at all. Yulu's reputation in their circle was already quite poor, known for being reckless, so this sudden drama wasn't entirely surprising. 2 years ago, when Yi Shiwei offended her boyfriend, Yulu had been there and noticed Shiwei's striking resemblance to Mukin. She ordered an investigation and discovered Mukin wasn't her brother, but the biological son of the Yi family. To her, he was the only interesting person in that cold house, so she plotted the bankruptcy to keep him trapped. She hoped that even if the truth came out, he wouldn't return to a ruined family, but she still feared the revelation. She felt she had to take the choice away from him, ensuring he wouldn't return to the Yi family to suffer after their bankruptcy. Then, she had the audacity to flaunt it, telling him the Yi family were paupers and he should just stay in the Mu family. She promised to keep spoiling him as her brother, but her real aim was to reveal the truth to him early. Before the situation became public knowledge, she wanted him to have time to prepare and use the Mu family resources for investments. She hoped he'd save enough to avoid a hard life later, never imagining the secret would be exposed so quickly, which was quite a miscalculation. In just 2 years, Mukin had come knocking, and his departure felt wrong. He'd rather stand on his own than stay an adopted son. The only thing she hadn't anticipated was his choice to actually return to the Yi family. Mu Yulu rested her chin on her hand and let out a frustrated sigh, still unsure if her decisions had been right or wrong. We see Mukin taking the initiative to find them, but how did he even know he was switched at birth? That was the question haunting her. During lunch on Monday with Lu Ruyan, she began to explore this mystery, knowing the truth of his origins had been hidden for years. Considering Mu Yaowei and Chun Jingyi never valued him, it was impossible they would suddenly go looking for their biological son. And since the Yi family had long been bankrupt, Mukin had no way to contact them. So how did he learn the truth? Where did that paternity test even come from? As Rian listened, she found the whole situation incredibly suspicious. When he was born, the Mu family was already elite with private hospitals. A simple mistake seemed unlikely. This felt intentional. Mukin showed up with that paternity test in hand, and if he really is the biological son, that's one thing. But where did he get that document? And if he isn't the biological son, then the person pulling the strings is playing a very deep game. She didn't care whose family she belonged to, nor did she care if Mukin was the real heir, but she hated being someone's puppet. She felt like a pawn in a game where the opponent's goal and target remained completely unknown. She despised the feeling of being calculated against, deciding to investigate privately while asking Rian to feel out Mukin's intentions. Rian poured her a glass of orange juice, appearing unconcerned, as the switch had happened when they were all just children. She reasoned that even if someone was targeting a specific person, it certainly wasn't her, so it didn't truly affect her personally. Naturally, there was no need for excessive worry, but being watched from the shadows is a chilling sensation, to say the least. Finding the truth was the only way to feel secure, and she trusted Lu Rian completely, as Rian narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. Rian teased that the young master was being far too polite, noting that after 17 years, they were starting to feel like strangers. She shot her a glare, telling her to tone down the drama, while Rian put on a show of being utterly heartbroken. Rian lamented being called Boss Lu instead of Sister Yen, and though she playfully swatted Rian's back, the other woman didn't flinch. We see that their research institute has gene testing equipment, making it easy to run a match if they can just get a strand of Mukin's hair. After graduation, there was no need to go abroad, but with the early graduation application submitted, she was now managing all the company affairs. Rian laughed, asking why she hadn't come to help sooner, jokingly reminding her that she wasn't a donkey on a production team. She complained about a boss who only invests money without doing any work, and then it was time for class to begin. As the teacher entered with the textbooks, Mu Xuan glanced toward her empty seat, a subtle, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. A flash of shrewdness crossed his eyes. He knew she had been picked up at noon and still hadn't returned even as class started. He wondered aloud if she had an emergency and suggested they start without her, a classic bit of Mu Xuan's manipulative tea-talk behavior. Lin Jejun rolled his eyes, thinking the boy had learned his lesson, only to see him seizing another chance to throw shade. Raising his voice, Lin Jejun announced that Mukin had simply gone to discuss a partnership with Lu Rian. He pointed out that since she had been picked up by Boss Lu herself, the teacher had absolutely no reason to worry about her safety, and the teacher nodded in immediate understanding. The teacher opened the textbook to begin the lecture, leaving Muxuan's face pale with disbelief that the school ignored such absences. But Shanghua is filled with the descendants of powerful families, and while most will inherit empires, many already run their own businesses. Missing a class for a business meeting was something the teachers had long ago grown accustomed to seeing. The school was remarkably relaxed in this regard, primarily because they wanted their students to have real-world affairs to manage. Naturally, they wouldn't dream of restricting their growth. Missing a class was no issue as long as they didn't fail the final exam. As a newcomer, Muxuan didn't understand that to pull Mukin from her pedestal, he would first have to remove Lu Rian. If he couldn't remove her, he'd need a better plan. By the time Mukin returned to school, it was already the third period. It happened to be equestrian class, so she headed to the locker room to change before joining her classmates at the stables. After a lunch with Sister Yin that lasted hours, she shot a meaningful look toward Muxuan, thinking of the major life events ahead. Events that, to be perfectly honest, concerned both her bloodline and her entire net worth. Lin Jejun teased that they'd finally confirmed their relationship, and she glared back playfully, as they were more like soulmates. Jejun curled his lip, muttering that everyone already knew the two of them were practically engaged for life. She rolled her eyes at him, retorting that he and Mingxi were the ones truly destined for each other. He scoffed, asking where this supposed destiny was coming from. He insisted that the type of person he actually liked was someone more like her older sister. Besides, he wondered who still bothered with arranged childhood marriages in this day and age. He claimed he and Mingxi were just brothers, and if they actually married for an alliance later, it would be nothing but daily awkwardness. She found it hilarious, noting that he was simply obsessed with looks. She pointed out that Mingxi's gentle nature would eventually bore him, even though Mingxi was a perfect match. Jejun grumbled that she was just being overprotective before reaching out to playfully grab her waist. She laughed and begged for mercy, dodging his advances just as she saw Shun Mingxi approaching in her peripheral vision. She called out for Mingxi to come control his future husband, making Jejun's ears turn red as he instantly stopped. Mingxi's ears flushed as well as he looked down to rub his nose. After all, the Linshan engagement was no secret, but having it announced so loudly in public was still quite embarrassing for everyone involved. Suddenly, a shrill, desperate scream shattered the atmosphere. We see Muxuan nearby, deathly pale and clutching his reins. His face was twisted in terror as Teacher Ma galloped behind him, looking for any chance to save him. The teacher shouted instructions while chasing, telling him not to pull so hard and to just relax his body. He tried to teach Muxuan how to control the horse, but with only screams filling his ears, the boy couldn't relax. His palms were sweating and his heart was racing. Lin Jejun watched, stunned by such a clumsy display. Jejun curled his lip in disbelief, wondering how Muxuan managed to get terrified in every single equestrian class. Shun Mingxi shook his head with a sigh, questioning how Muxuan even passed the entrance exam in the first place. He noted that if Muxuan were thrown off, he'd likely dislocate an arm, yet Jejun remained entirely unbothered. Jejun argued the teacher was already there, so it wasn't his problem, until the teacher's voice echoed from afar. The teacher called for Mukin's help. As Jejun and Mingxi laughed at the irony, she let out a helpless sigh. She mounted her horse and gave chase, thinking that being a top student isn't always a blessing, before pulling Muxuan to safety. Once they were back, the teacher secured the runaway horse, but Muxuan had already fainted from the shock. After the school doctor took him away, she patted her horse, one she'd raised since it was a foal, as if praising it. Lin Jejun walked over and patted her shoulder, teasing her for being kind enough to save that young master. Shun Mingxi chimed in playfully, remarking that Mukin didn't have a choice, given her reputation at school. She shot them both a fake look of annoyance, asking if they were teaming up to call her heartless. Jejun gave a mock smile, while Mingxi pointed out that she brought this on herself by taking first place in exams. He reminded her that showing off her skills last year is why the teacher called her name today. Being too strong has its price. She noted that without those skills, she might not be number one, or even be able to stay at Manhwa Academy. Lin Jejun and Shun Mingxi finally stopped joking, as there was indeed a formidable figure in their grade, the talented Lu Mingyun. We learned that he is Mukin's strongest rival at school, with their academic scores often being neck and neck. During every exam, she barely wins by a few points. In fact, during the last equestrian test, Mingyun achieved a shockingly high score. If she hadn't increased her own difficulty level to match the situation, she might have lost her 1-point lead in the final grades. She told herself that without that win, she might not be studying at Manhwa this year. Meanwhile, the handsome Mingyun remains quite popular. However, she always felt something sinister about him, and even Jejun couldn't help but shiver when recalling Mingyun's smile. It wasn't an overtly villainous expression, but rather a smile as warm as a spring breeze that somehow didn't reach his unsettling eyes. There was a sense of hidden malice that sent a chill down one's spine, especially in the way he looked at her. With a smile on his face, but secrets buried deep, his hostility was so subtle it was nearly impossible to read his true thoughts. Shun Mingxi nodded in agreement, having dealt with Mingyun twice and finding him to be something of a smiling tiger. The boy rarely spoke the truth, yet he radiated a coldness from within that left Myukin feeling quite thoughtful. She had never actually met Mingyun face-to-face, only competing with him on the leaderboards without ever looking into his background. In the elite circles of the capital, there seemed to be no mention of a prominent Lu family, though Mingxi knew a few rumors. Lin Jiejun, on the other hand, was simply filled with confusion regarding the whole situation. As for why Mingyun came to the capital to study, Mingxi shrugged, noting it was rare for such students to appear in noble academies. Our school does have students from other provinces, so perhaps he was simply drawn by the prestige of Shenghua's education. He might have been sent here intentionally, but as strange as Mingyun was, she decided it ultimately had nothing to do with her. Since she didn't even know the person, she reasoned he couldn't be targeting her specifically and decided to stop overthinking it. She mounted her horse once more, galloping freely across the meadow to enjoy the wind and practice for a while longer. Afterward, she went to change for her next class, and we see her stepping out of the locker room once she was ready. As it turns out, she ran right into the very person her friends had called sinister, Lu Mingyun, whose thin lips curled into a faint smile. Although his eyes caught the light, there wasn't a trace of warmth behind them. He asked, seemingly without hostility, if she was there to change. Or perhaps he was waiting for her specifically. Lu Mingyun offered a candid smile, noting that there had been many rumors circulating lately. He suggested that a clever person like Myukin wouldn't be so foolish as to sacrifice her long-term future just for the sake of loyalty. She narrowed her eyes almost imperceptibly before quickly regaining her composure, reminding him that if he knew they were just rumors, they weren't worth discussing. There was no need for such nonsense. He then cut to the chase, asking for the real reason she had left the Mu family. Sensing a flicker of danger in his gaze, she looked back calmly and asked if he would believe her if she said it was to find her true family. She raised an eyebrow, questioning why he even bothered to ask, and without another word, she simply brushed past him. Lu Mingyun's expression froze as his smile vanished, leaving behind a look of undisguised, cold malice in his eyes. After returning to the lounge and taking a seat, she opened a bottle of water and began to replay their brief conversation in her mind. It seemed Lin Jiejun and Shin Mingxi were right about him. There wasn't a single flaw to be found in Lu Mingyun's carefully chosen words. He wore a smile while his eyes remained ruthless, projecting a faint, mysterious hostility that was nearly impossible to decipher. In theory, the other wealthy students weren't blind, and if his behavior was truly this unsettling, they surely would have noticed. It would be impossible for him to be so popular if he didn't hide his true nature exceptionally well. To be honest, he was a master of masks. Yet, for some reason, he couldn't seem to hide it from her, and his hostility extended even to those close to her. He was clearly targeting her. She found it difficult to understand, as this was their very first face-to-face encounter, and they had never crossed paths before. Coming from the elite gold circle, she knew their social worlds were miles apart, and they had certainly never met outside of school. Perhaps it was because she had outperformed him for 2 years, but he seemed strangely obsessed with why she had left the Mu family. For someone from a different social circle to be so invested in elite gossip was quite bizarre. One might even wonder if he held a grudge against the Muse. But even if he did, why approach her? She eventually decided to stop overthinking it, knowing that the truth would reveal itself in time. Our scene shifts as Lin Jiejun hops onto the desk with a casual thud, asking if she wants to grab a drink at his winery tonight. She gently pats his hand away while tidying her books, frowning slightly as she tells him to mind his public image with a playful glare. He simply tugs at his clothes, complaining that despite his winery being open for so long, she hasn't visited even once. Shin Mingxi rolls his eyes at that, asking why Jiejun is so confident when everyone knows the winery is bound to fail eventually. Jiejun lets out a huff and swats Mingxi's arm, telling him to stay out of the conversation. To be honest, they were always like this. Mingxi reminds him that the last batch of new wine he was supposed to deliver ended up being a total disaster. He leans against another desk, claiming he still needs to settle that particular debt. It was quite a mess, really. Facing Jiejun directly, he explains that the deal fell through suddenly because they had to avoid a surprise inspection for smuggled goods. Jiejun insists it wasn't a deliberate move on his part, promising to make it up to him as soon as he finds a better vintage. As we listen to the two of them bicker, Jiejun gets so worked up that he actually tries to start a mock fight. He threatens to strip off Mingxi's coat in front of everyone, and soon the two of them are a tangled mess of embarrassment and laughter. The lounge is filled with their cheerful noise, and she can't help but lower her head to hide a smile at these lifelong rivals. It's no wonder Jiejun only sees him as a brother. Seeing her smile, Jiejun reaches out and pokes her arm playfully. He tells her not to just sit there enjoying the show and reminds her that she still hasn't given him an answer. He even offers to prepare some grape juice from 1982 just for her. A very specific vintage, naturally. She points out that 1982 grape juice is still wine, and he wouldn't dare let her touch alcohol for fear of Lu Rian's reaction. Everyone knows she is the person Rian holds closest to his heart, and he is fiercely protective of her well-being. He would eliminate anything even slightly harmful to her, and if Jejun gave her wine, he'd likely be the next one on the hit list. She calmly tells them to stop arguing, explaining that she can't go tonight because Mu Ningxue has already invited her to dinner. Lin Jejun practically leaps off the table in shock, looking as if he's just heard the most world-shattering news imaginable. His voice rises several octaves in disbelief, echoing through the room as he processes what she just said. He demands to know why the eldest daughter of the Mu family is getting involved in her business again. Shen Mingxi pats her shoulder with a look of grim determination, asking if Ningxue plans to kidnap her. With a tragic expression, as if sending her off to war, he mentions he has a protective vest at home. He offers to have it brought over immediately for her to wear tonight. And really, we can't blame them for being so defensive. They've known her for over a decade and are well aware of the friction between her and the two Mu sisters. We learn that Mu Yulu once had a large dog, and at 17, she grew resentful of Mu Ningxue's strict control. She set the dog on the 19-year-old Ningxue, but Ningxue dealt with the animal without a second thought. The incident threw the Mu household into chaos, leading Mu Yaowei and Chun Jingyi to interrogate the two sisters. Yulu refused to admit she gave the order, while Ningxue simply shifted the entire blame onto her instead. Their parents knew she was innocent, yet they still forced her to reflect on her sins and grounded her for a month. To retaliate, Yulu later snuck into the company where Ningxue was training and shut off the main power grid. The blackout caused a massive loss of data and over $1 million in damages. Ningxue didn't say a word in response. Instead, she immediately went out and smashed Yulu's favorite car to pieces. Both sisters were clearly in the wrong. Yulu falsely claimed she was the one who pulled the power switch, and once again, their parents indulged the lie. Having just finished her previous punishment, she was locked away for another month. It was then that she finally understood. She realized she was merely a pawn for a future marriage alliance. No matter how well-behaved she was, they would never truly see her. She would never receive a word of praise. Instead, she became a magnet for disasters she didn't cause. She was the perpetual scapegoat for her sister's mistakes, simply because she didn't matter to the family. Through these events, she saw her sisters for who they were, one cold and ruthless, the other wild and reckless. She knew that to survive her childhood, she had to fight back. Her friends often remarked that it was a miracle she had even made it this far. The idea of her having a private dinner with the eldest sister seemed like a recipe for disaster. "You're really going alone?" they asked. Shin Mingxi suggested, only half joking, that perhaps she should call the police in advance just to be safe. Or at the very least, she should bring a self-defense stick, considering how unpredictable Ningxue's temper could be. They genuinely feared that if Ningxue didn't like what she heard, she might decide to teach her sister a physical lesson right then and there. Lin Jiejun was filled with worry, looking at his friend who seemed far too fragile and defenseless to attend such a meeting. Who knew what might happen? Ningxue gave him a sharp look and asked if he wanted to come along as her escort. She reminded him that he had promised Rian he would act as her bodyguard. Jiejun took a sharp breath at the suggestion. He admitted quite honestly that he was no match for Mu Ningxue in a fight, and really, who could blame him? Everyone remembered how she had completely lost her temper at a previous banquet, which was quite a scene. She had taught the troublemakers a lesson they wouldn't forget on the spot, showing no restraint whatsoever. That incident was exactly why her father had sent her abroad. Ningxue told them both to relax and stop worrying. She was certain her sister wouldn't actually hit her. Despite their friction, she felt deep down that she wasn't in any real physical danger. Lin Jiejun pulled up a chair and sat beside her, insisting that one could never be too sure with that family. He pointed out that while her sisters might protect her from outside threats, they were a different story entirely in private. When there is no external danger, he argued, the sisters themselves become the greatest danger she has to face. The previous incidents with the Jing clan were small compared to what these sisters were capable of doing to each other. He reminded her of the time she was forced to stand as punishment for 6 months. She rubbed her nose, unsure of how to respond. To be fair, that particular punishment wasn't entirely Ningxue's fault. It happened when Ningxue took her out at age 13. They were cornered by people sent by a rival family. Without any bodyguards, Ningxue had to protect her while fighting off multiple attackers. She recalled being struck on the leg with a wooden club, though luckily her training allowed her to dodge enough to recover fully after 6 months. During those 6 months of recovery, Lu Rian personally escorted her everywhere, and it was from Rian that she heard the rest of the story. Mu Ningxue had dealt with every single one of those attackers with such ruthless efficiency that she had, in her own way, exacted a terrifying revenge. Even so, the memory still made her skin crawl, which was why she still couldn't bring herself to truly like her sister. Ningxue was expressionless, impossible to read, and possessed a dangerous level of strength, yet she smiled to comfort her two worried friends. She reminded them that she had been dealing with her sisters for 17 years and would be fine, though Lin Jiejun only sighed in response. Scratching his short hair, he noted that Lu Rian was also currently in the capital city. He told her to call immediately if anything happened so they could bring in reinforcements. They were ready to rush over and call the police at a moment's notice as the sky darkened and the school day finally came to an end. She packed her bag and took a deep breath, not at all looking forward to facing her eldest sister, though she knew she had no choice. Avoiding her today would only lead to a confrontation tomorrow, and as she reached the school gates, she realized she couldn't hide forever. There stood the familiar dark green Mercedes, and to her surprise, Mu Ningxue had actually stepped out of the car to wait for her. She remarked with a sarcastic edge that she was quite flattered to have the young mistress herself acting as her personal driver. Ningxue looked around, asking where her cheap younger brother was, as she didn't see anyone in the school uniform waiting there. Ningxue had clearly done her research and knew Yi Zishi usually picked her up every day, so she adjusted her bag and met her sister's gaze. She explained that since they had dinner plans, she told him to go home first, causing Ningxue's eyes to darken with a hint of danger. When Ningxue observed how protective she was of him, she replied with a fake smile that she was simply being cautious around her sister. The two of them locked eyes in a silent battle of wills, while Lin Jiejun and Shin Mingxi watched from a safe distance. They felt as though a fuse had been lit, fearing the two might start a public shouting match before they even reached the restaurant. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as they watched Mu Ningxue's lips begin to move. They had barely exchanged 2 sentences, and yet the atmosphere had already turned incredibly hostile. Lin Jiejun felt it would be safer to follow them, not even waiting to debate how they might actually help. Suddenly, an uninvited guest appeared. Mu Xian, wearing his school uniform, came running toward them with a certain flair. He looked youthful and bright, his smile radiating a sunny charm that masked his true intentions quite well. Though they hadn't met since the banquet, he was still her biological brother, and Mu Ningxue's presence suggested a desire for reconciliation. Noticing the unpleasant vibe and his own dislike for the fake young master, Mu Xian began to act in an exaggeratedly sweet manner. Thinking he could win her over, he asked if she was there for him, reminding her that he was her true brother. He begged for her protection, completely unaware of the kind of people the Mu sisters truly were, prompting a cold snort from her. She rolled her eyes, feeling a wave of pity for Yi Zishi, as if Mu Xian had been the one suffering all those years. Deep down, she knew he would eventually get what was coming to him, even as Mu Xian gave her a triumphant glare. He put on a show of being considerate and obedient, claiming he didn't blame her for stealing 17 years of his life. He told Ningxue not to be too hard on her, and since they had things to discuss, he tried to get into the car. However, he found the rear door locked, and despite knocking on the window, the driver refused to even acknowledge him. Mu Xian turned to Ningxue with a wounded expression, complaining about the driver, which made her burst out laughing. She told Ningxue that since her real brother was waiting, she would take her leave, attempting a quick escape from the scene. Mu Xian stood there frozen, looking between the two of them, unable to believe that Ningxue had actually come for her. The school gates were crowded at this hour, and naturally, a large group of onlookers had gathered to enjoy the drama. Mu Xian realized he couldn't afford to lose face in front of so many people, so he forced a smile onto his face. He pretended Ningxue had invited them both to dinner, suggesting they leave quickly so their parents would be pleased by their bond. It was a blatant attempt to use their parents' names to pressure Mu Ningxue into playing along with his little charade. If the Mu family's reputation were tarnished, their parents would surely scold them, but Mu Ningxue felt no affection for her parents anyway. Naturally, she wasn't afraid of being blamed. She simply ignored Mu Xian's clumsy tricks, never even sparing him a single glance. We see Yi Zishi standing her ground, meeting Ningxue's gaze without flinching, which caused the elder sister to narrow her eyes slightly. Ningxue remarked that she had certainly grown bolder over the years, to which Zishi replied that she wouldn't dare board such a fine car. She refused to get in, suggesting they just wait there, and when Ningxue asked if she needed an invitation, Zishi didn't back down. She wanted to see what kind of trouble Ningxue was planning, knowing full well that the Mu family was a chaotic mess of rivalries. The two sisters had been at each other's throats since childhood, constantly tripping one another up and shifting the blame. In the past, Zishi had even used the second sister to check the eldest, and vice versa, keeping them both in a state of mutual restraint. Mu Ningxue gritted her teeth and let out a helpless sigh, telling her to just get in. Zishi smiled, having won another round. Only then did she agree to board, and as she approached the rear door, the driver quickly unlocked it for her. She slid inside, and only after she was settled did Ningxue cast a cold, dismissive look toward Mu Xian. She remarked that any stray dog thinks they can climb upward, but those who don't belong would only end up making her car dirty. Her words weren't aimed at strangers. She was clearly disgusted by a brother like Mu Xian, viewing him as a stain on her status. As Mu Ningxue walked around to the other side to get in, Zishi rolled down her window and let out a soft, mocking laugh. She told him to practice his horsemanship, warning him that if a situation like today happened again, she wouldn't be there to save him. An ungrateful person is worse than a dog, she noted, as the window rose and the car sped away, leaving Mu Xian fuming. He couldn't believe his eldest sister had given him no face at all, taking Zishi while leaving him behind, despite him being the biological son. He wondered why Zishi, who no longer even shared the Mu name, was still respected and protected by someone like Mu Ningxue. He felt haunted by her presence, while the onlookers saw the truth clearly. Being the real, young master didn't mean he was loved. In the eyes of Mu Ningxue, it seemed that Mu Xian wasn't worth even a fraction of the sister she had grown up with. Regardless of the Mu parents' attitude, the family estate would ultimately be inherited by Mu Ningxue, and without her approval, the title of young master was essentially hollow. Meanwhile, Mother Yi turned to her daughter, who had come to help after school, assuring her she was fine. Yi Zishi frowned slightly, telling her mother that she understood exactly what she was worried about. Just then, Lin Jejun ran over excitedly, his eyes practically glued to Zishi's face as if he couldn't look away. He wondered how someone could be so beautiful, like a celestial being among mortals, while Shun Mingxi watched on with a silent, knowing expression. As they approached, Mingxi moved with a subtle grace, stepping sideways to block Jejun's intense gaze from reaching Zishi. Mother Yi greeted them with a warm, enthusiastic smile, welcoming them as friends of her daughter. She offered to make them a deluxe version of her rice balls to taste, immediately preparing one with extra fillings. She cut it in half to share with them, and Mingxi politely accepted the gesture, knowing it would be rude to refuse. Jejun also began eating with great relish, taking a large, enthusiastic bite of the rice ball. He ate without any pretense, which made the food look even more appetizing and caused Mother Ye's eyes to crinkle with joy. She told them to let her know in advance next time so she could prepare more dishes, as they were always welcome. Seeing her child have so many kind-hearted friends at school made her realize that her daughter was truly well-liked. As a mother, she couldn't help but feel relieved and happy, especially with these two lively boys adding to the atmosphere. Several other classmates wandered over, realizing that the woman at the stall was Zishi's mother, and began to support the business. A crowded stall naturally attracts more customers, and soon they were quite busy, with Zishi stepping in to help as well. Lin Jejun spent the entire time admiring her with a look of pure infatuation, causing Shun Mingxi to roll his eyes in exasperation. Mingxi felt that being ranked lower than Zishi in his friend's heart was one thing, but being surpassed by everyone was quite another. His status felt precarious, as he feared his friend might choose beauty over their friendship. He decided he needed to take action. And so, Shun Mingxi subtly shifted his position, once again blocking the boy's view of Yi Zishi. As the weekend approached, Lin Jejun's intense gaze followed Yi Zishi everywhere, eventually leading him to ask if she wanted to see a movie. With stars practically in his eyes, he looked at her and blurted out how beautiful she was, a bit blunt, perhaps, but certainly honest. Zishi was used to being treated like a local attraction or a poetic masterpiece whenever she went out shopping in public. However, being stared at like that by her brother's best friend made her feel a little self-conscious, which was a rare change for her. Meanwhile, Lin Jejun casually threw an arm around Shun Mingxi's shoulder, acting as if he hadn't just been shamelessly flirting. Mingxi sighed, thinking his friend was a bit of a brute for saying such things in front of a sister. They had known each other for over a decade. He truly felt that Jejun lacked a filter sometimes, which, to be honest, explained why Mingxi was his only close friend. Zishi, on the other hand, found his straightforward personality rather refreshing and didn't seem to take any offense at all. Jejun excitedly pressed the issue, thinking that if he could just convince Zishi to join them, his weekend would be made. He just wanted more time to admire her beauty, but Zishi shook her head, explaining she had a part-time job this weekend. She told them to go on without her, causing Jejun's spirit to deflate instantly as he wondered what the young master was so busy with. For the past 2 weeks, having just returned to the Yi family, the protagonist had been spending his weekends visiting the hospital. With Lu Rian back as well, another visit was likely. Zishi didn't know the specifics of what her brother was actually managing. But after spending time together, she sensed he carried a heavy burden, knowing that even without the Mu name, he was far from ordinary. He clearly managed many hidden industries, proving he wasn't just a typical high schooler, and she respected that his private affairs were his own. She didn't pry further, simply telling the boys they were welcome to visit their home whenever they had the time. Once the rice balls were sold out, the stall closed up. Father Yi arrived to pick them up, and Mingxi helped load the cart into the vehicle. The Ming family car had been waiting by the roadside for a while, and soon Mingxi was pulling Jejun toward it to head out. He planned to take his friend home to help organize some things, sighing at the thought that he, like Lu Ruyan, was often just a useful tool. And yet, deep down, he felt their situations weren't quite the same as night finally began to fall over the city. The car window reflects a look of utter boredom as we see him arrive at the very same restaurant yet again. Perhaps because she had so few memories of the Mu family, Mu Ningxue had simply bought the place since they visited so often. She always brought him here to eat, but human enthusiasm has its limits, and visiting the same spot repeatedly eventually becomes tiresome. Just as he had grown weary of the Mu family's coldness, he asked directly why she had gone to such trouble to bring him out. He wanted to know her true goal. After all, she had sought him out yesterday only to end up wandering aimlessly before this dinner invite. Realizing this wasn't a conversation for small talk, Mu Ningxue took a sip of red wine and asked if his new family treated him well. It seemed like a lot of effort just to ask that, especially since his life now wasn't much different from being a young master of the Mu family. She set her glass down in silence, neither agreeing nor disagreeing with his response, knowing full well he had planned to flee the muse for years. In fact, she had spent the last 2 years secretly providing him with investments so he would have the assets to protect himself. However, she never expected him to return to the Yi family to live with people she considered worthless, given the industries he already owned. With just a little effort, his current wealth could provide a comfortable life, yet he insisted on wasting time and resources helping the Yes. As he watched the night sky through the window, he felt an unprecedented sense of peace, and for him, that was more than enough.